and the weight of her grief felt heavier. She returned to her chores, but now, even the simplest tasks felt like a mountain to climb. Nkechi's patience had wore thin, and Ijoma's insult became more frequent. "You are so slow, Adamma," Ijoma would say, her voice dripping with disdain. "It's no wonder your parents are gone. They must have been tired of you." Once upon a time, in the peaceful and flourishing village of Achala, surrounded by vast green fields and clear streams, there lived a beloved family. This family was led by Chief Okeke, a kind and wise man, and his gentle wife, Mama Adamma. Together, they were the pride of the village, known for their generosity, hard work, and the love they shared with everyone around them. Chief Okeke was a successful farmer, and his fields were always full of ripe crops. Mama Adamma was known for her delicious meals and the warmth she brought to their home. Their daughter, Adamma, was the light of their lives. She was a happy, playful girl with bright eyes that sparkled with curiosity. Adamma loved spending her days playing in the fields, listening to the songs of the birds, and helping her parents with small chores. In the evenings, she would sit by the fire with her parents, listening to the stories her father told about the great heroes and heroines of their land. Her favorite stories were about queens and princesses who were brave and kind, just like her mother. Life was good for Adamma and her parents. The villagers admired and respected Chief Okeke and Mama Adamma, and they often visited their home to seek advice or share a meal. The laughter and joy that filled their home were known throughout Achala, and everyone who visited left with a smile. But one fateful day, everything changed. A dark cloud of sorrow and fear descended upon the village when a strange illness began to spread. At first, it was just a few people who fell sick, but soon, the illness spread like wildfire. People began to cough and feel weak, and their energy drained away as if the very life was being pulled out of them. The village healer tried every herb and remedy he knew, but nothing seemed to work. The illness continued to spread, and the village was gripped by fear. Chief Okeke and Mama Adamma did everything they could to protect their daughter from the illness. They kept her indoors and made sure she ate well, hoping to keep her strong and healthy. But despite their efforts, the illness found its way into their home. Mama Adamma was the first to fall ill. One morning, as she was preparing breakfast, she suddenly felt dizzy and weak. Her hands trembled, and she had to sit down. Adamma noticed the change in her mother immediately. She ran to her side and held her hand. "Mama, are you okay?" Adamma asked, her voice filled with concern. Mama Adamma smiled weakly at her daughter. "I'm fine, Nwam. Just a little tired. I will be okay." But Mama Adamma was not okay. As the days passed, Her condition worsened. She became so weak that she could no longer get out of bed. Chief Okeke was beside himself with worry. He cared for her wife day and night, hoping and praying that she would recover. But no matter how much he cared for her, Mama Adamma grew weaker and weaker. Adamma watched helplessly as her mother's health declined. She wanted to help, to do something to make her mother better. But she was just a child. All she could do was sit by her mother's bedside, holding her hand and praying for her to get well. One evening, as the sun was setting and casting a golden glow over the village, Mama Adamma called her daughter to her side. Her voice was weak, but her eyes were filled with love. Adamma, Nwam, meaning my child. Mama Adamma whispered, "Come closer." Adamma climbed onto the bed and sat beside her mother, holding her hand tightly. "Mama, I'm here," she said, her voice trembling with fear. Mama Adamma smiled at her daughter, though her smile was tinged with sadness. "You are such a brave and kind girl, Adamma. Your father and I are so proud of you, but I need you to be even braver now. I may not be here much longer." Adamma's heart filled with fear and sorrow. "Mama, please don't say that. You are going to get better. You have to." Tears welled up in Mama Adamma's eyes as she stroked her daughter's hair. "Mwam, you must listen to me. Life is not always easy, but you must stay strong and always do what is right. Promise me, Mwam, that you will be brave no matter what happens." Adamma nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I promise, Mama, I'll be brave." Mama Adamma smiled, though it was clear that she was in great pain. "I love you, Adamma Nwam. Always remember that." With those words, Mama Adamma closed her eyes, and a peaceful stillness settled over her. Adamma felt her mother's hand grow limp in hers, and she knew deep down in her heart that her mother was gone. Chief Okeke was devastated by the loss of his beloved wife. He had been a strong man all his life, but the grief of losing Mama Adamma was too much for him to bear. He fell into a deep sadness, and not long after, he too fell sick. Adamma, now alone in the world, watched as her father's health declined. She did her best to care for him, just as he had cared for her mother. But she was only a child. She could not stop the illness from taking her father away as well. One cold morning, as the village was shrouded in mist, Chief Okeke took his last breath. The strong and wise man who had been the pillar of their family was no more. Adamma was now an orphan, alone in the world with no one to care for her. The villagers gathered to mourn the loss of Chief Okeke and Mama Adamma. They were loved and respected by all, and their passing left a deep wound in the hearts of the villagers. But no one felt the pain as deeply as Adamma. In just a few short days, her whole world had crumbled, leaving her alone and afraid. After the burial, Adamma stood by the graves of her parents, her heart heavy with grief. The rain continued to fall, as if the sky itself was weeping for her loss. She felt lost, like a small boat adrift in a vast ocean. The world that had once been so full of love and warmth now seemed cold and empty. Without her parent, Adama had no one to care for her. She was just a child, too young to fend for herself, and the villagers were worried about what would become of her. It was then that Nkechi, her mother's younger sister, stepped forward. Soon after the funeral, a tall, stern-looking woman arrived in the village. Her name was Nkechi, Adama's mother's younger sister. Nkechi had a commanding presence, with sharp features and eyes that missed nothing. She wore a wrapper tightly secured around her waist and a matching blouse, with a headscarf tied so tightly that not a single strand of hair was out of place. Her expression was hard, and she wasted no time with pleasantries. "Adama," Nkechi called out, her voice firm and unyielding. "You are coming with me." Adama, who had been staring at the fresh graves of her parents, turned to face her aunt. She had no words, only a deep sense of loss and confusion. Without hesitation, Nkechi took Adama by the hand and led her away from the village that had been her home. Nkechi lived in a neighboring village called Umunze, a place unfamiliar to Adama. She only had stories about Umunze. The journey there was long, and Adama, with her small feet, struggled to keep up with her aunt's brisk pace. She stumbled several times, but Nkechi did not slow down or offer any words of comfort. By the time they arrived at Nkechi's house, Adama was exhausted and scared. Nkechi's house was a large compound, surrounded by tall, imposing walls. The gates creaked as they opened, revealing a courtyard that was as cold and unwelcoming as Nkechi herself. The house was neatly kept, with everything in its place, but it lacked the warmth and love that Adama had known in her parents' home. As soon as they entered, Nkechi called out to her daughter Ijoma. "Ijoma, come and see your cousin," Nkechi said. Ijoma appeared from one of the inner rooms, dressed in a colorful, expensive dress. She was around the same age as Adama, but the differences between them were stark. Ijoma's eyes were filled with a mix of curiosity and disdain as she looked Adama up and down. "So, this is the orphan," Ijoma said, her tone dismissive. "Well, she doesn't look like much." Nkechi ignored her daughter's rudeness and turned to Adama. "From now on, you will do all the chores in this house. Ijoma has more important things to do than waste her time on such tasks. You will clean, you will cook, you will wash the clothes, you will fetch water, and you will also tend to the garden. Do you understand?" Adama nodded silently, not daring to speak. She was too tired and too overwhelmed to protest. Her new life began the next day. From the first light of dawn, Nkechi's voice rang through the house, ordering Adama to get up and start her chores. "Ngwa Adama, get up. You must earn your keeps here," Nkechi would say. "There is no room for laziness in this house." Adama worked from morning till night. Her small hands scrubbing floors, washing clothes, and preparing meals. The work was hard, and Nkechi and Ijoma were never satisfied. If Adamma made a mistake, Nkechi's sharp tongue would lash out at her, and Ijoma would smile with satisfaction. Adamma, you didn't sweep the corners properly, Ijoma would say with a sneer. Are you trying to bring rats into this house? Nne, see how she burns the food. She doesn't even know how to cook properly, Ijoma would complain, her voice full of mockery. Adamma bore it all silently. The memory of her parents' loving faces was the only thing that kept her going. She missed them terribly, and each night, as she lay on the hard mat in the corner of the kitchen where she slept, she would close her eyes and remember the warmth of their embrace, the sound of their voices, and the stories they used to tell her. But the constant work, lack of proper food, and the harsh treatment soon began to take a toll on her health. Adamma grew thinner and weaker with each passing day. Her hands became rough and sore from the constant scrubbing, and her feet ached from standing for hours on end. The little food she was given was never enough to satisfy her hunger, and her clothes became worn and tattered. One particular hot afternoon, as Adamma was returning from the stream carrying a pot of water, her vision blurred, and she felt a sudden wave of dizziness. The world around her spun, and before she could steady herself, she collapsed to the ground. The pot slipping from her hands and shattering into pieces. Nkechi, who had been watching from the veranda, rushed over, but not to help. Adamma, she shouted, her voice filled with anger. Look at what you have done. Do you think pots are free? What do you think will replace this one? Eh? Get up and clean this mess right now. But Adamma could not get up. Her body was too weak, her strength completely drained. She lay there, trembling, as Nkechi's angry words washed over her. Ijoma stood by, her arms crossed, watching with a smile. I told you, Nne, she was useless. She said, she can't even carry a pot of water, ordinary pot though. Realizing that Adamma was too weak to move, Nkechi finally relented. Get up, you lazy girl, she muttered, dragging Adamma to her feet. You can rest today, but tomorrow you will work twice as hard to make up for this. Adamma was led back to her mat in the kitchen, where she collapsed, her body burning with fever. For days, she lay there, too sick to move. Nkechi, though angry, was not completely heartless. She gave Adamma some herbs to help with the fever, but there was little care beyond that. As Adamma lay on her mat, drifting in and out of sleep, she dreamed of her parents. In her dreams, they were with her, their faces full of concern and love. They held her hand, comforted her, and told her to be strong. Adamma, her mother's voice echoed in her dream. You are stronger than you know. You must hold on, my child. Slowly, after several days, the fever broke, and Adamma began to recover. But the sickness had left her even weaker than before, and the weight of her grief felt heavier. She returned to her chores, but now, even the simplest tasks felt like a mountain to climb. Nkechi's patience had wore thin, and Ijeoma's insult became more frequent. "You are so slow, Adamma," Ijeoma would say, her voice dripping with disdain. "It's no wonder your parents are gone. They must have been tired of you." The words stung, but Adamma swallowed her pain, focusing on her work. She knew that she had nowhere else to go, and that as hard as life was with Nkechi, it was the only life she had. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Adamma's life was a constant circle of work, scolding, and exhaustion. There were moments when she wanted to give up, to let the sadness swallow her whole. But each time, she remembered her parents' last words to her. She remembered their love, their strength, and the values they had instilled in her. "Mwam," her father's voice would echo in her memory. "You must always be strong and kind, no matter what life throws at you." And so, Adamma continued, clinging to the hope that one day her life might change for the better. But for now, she was trapped in a world of misery, with only her memories to keep her going. Years has passed quickly, and Adamma had grown into a beautiful young woman. One morning, as the first rays of the morning sun filtered through the small window of the kitchen where Adamma slept, the light danced on the rough mat that served as her bed, gently waking her from her slumber. Adamma stretched her aching limbs, feeling the familiar stiffness in her joints from the constant work she was made to do. With a deep sigh, she rose from her mat, ready to begin another long day. She moved quietly, so as not to wake Nkechi or Ijeoma. The house was silent, except for the soft chirping of birds outside. Adamma's first task was always to sweep the compound. She picked up the broom, its bristles worn and frayed, and began to sweep, starting from the front yard and making her way to the back. The broom's soft swish, swish sound was the only thing that broke the silence of the early morning. As she swept, Adamma's thoughts wandered. She missed her parents terribly, and often found herself thinking about the happier times when her mother would sing while they cooked together, or when her father would tell her stories of brave heroes and wise kings. But those days were gone, and now her life was filled with endless chores and harsh words. After sweeping, Adamma moved on to her next task, fetching water from the stream. The stream was a good distance away from Nkechi's house, and Adamma had made several trips each morning to fill the large pots in the kitchen. She picked up the heavy metal bucket and balanced it on her head, setting off on the familiar path to the stream. The path to the stream was narrow, winding through the thick bushes and past tall trees. The morning air was cool and fresh, and the sound of the rushing water grew louder as she approached. Adamma was always careful as she walked, watching out for slippery rocks and hidden roots that could trip her. As she neared the stream, she heard the sounds of voices. At first, she thought it might be some of the other village girls who also came to fetch water. But as she got closer, she realized the voices were coming from a group of girls standing near the water's edge. They were chatting animatedly, their voices filled with excitement. Curious, Adama slowed her pace and listened closely. "Did you hear?" one of the girls said, her voice filled with enthusiasm. "Prince Uzo will be returning from Obodo Oyibo, which means abroad." "Yes, he will be coming back soon," another girl added. "And you know what? That means there will be a competition." "Ah, the competition!" a third girl exclaimed, clapping her hands in delight. "It's been so long since the last one. All the maidens in Umunze village will have to participate. I heard the prince will be settling down as soon as he arrives." Adama's heart skipped a beat as she heard the word competition. She remembered her parents telling her stories about the grand competitions held in Umunze whenever a prince was ready to marry. The competition were legendary, with tests of beauty, intelligence, and character. The maiden who won would become the prince's wife and the future queen of the village. But what if he doesn't like any of the girls? One of the girls asked. "Ah, don't worry," another replied with a laugh. "The prince will surely find someone. After all, the competition will be open to all the maidens of Umunze. No one is left out." Imagine being chosen by the prince. One of the girls sighed dreamily. "It would be like a dream come true for me." Adama's mind was racing. A competition for the prince, and it was compulsory for all the maidens in the village. This could be her chance to escape the miserable life she had been living with Nkechi and Ijoma for so many years. As she filled her bucket with water, Adama couldn't help but imagine what it would be like to participate in the competition. She had never seen the prince before, but from the story she heard about him, he had been studying abroad for so many years. The thought of possibly meeting him, let alone competing for his hand in marriage, seemed too incredible to be true. But then, doubt crept into her mind. What if Nkechi forbade her from participating? Adama knew that Nkechi would do everything in her power to keep her from joining the competition. Ijoma would certainly be allowed to participate, and Nkechi would want all of Adama's attention focused on the chores while Ijoma prepared for the competition. As she walked back home with the heavy bucket of water balanced on her head, Adama's thoughts were a whirlwind of hope and fear. She had never dared to dream of anything beyond the walls of Nkechi's house. But now, for the first time in a long while, she felt a tiny spark of hope flickering inside her. Maybe, just maybe, this competition could be her way out. If all the maidens were required to participate, then perhaps Nkechi would have no choice but to let her join. And if she did join, maybe she could do well. After all, Adama knew how to work hard, and she had learned many skills from her parents. She was also kind-hearted, and she believed that her parents' teachings would guide her in making the right choices. As she stepped into the compound, the familiar sight and sound of Nkechi's house greeted her. Ijoma was sitting on the veranda, lazily fanning herself and looking as though she had just woken up. Nkechi was inside, already barking orders for Adamma to hurry up with the water so she could start preparing breakfast. "Adamma, why are you so slow, you this girl?" Ijeoma called out, her voice sharp. "Are you trying to make us all go hungry?" "Nne, see how lazy she is." "Ijeoma, leave her." Nkechi's voice echoed from inside the house. "She has a lot to do today. We don't have time for her nonsense." Adamma hurriedly set the bucket down and went to the kitchen to set the fire for cooking. But even as she walked, her mind kept returning to the conversation she had overheard at the stream. She wondered what the competition would be like and what tests they would have to pass. The thought of competing against so many other girls made her nervous, but at the same time, it also made her excited. If she could just get a chance, maybe she could prove herself. Maybe, just maybe, she could win. As the day wore on, Adamma's thoughts kept drifting back to the competition. She imagined herself standing in the grand palace, dressed in beautiful clothes, performing the tasks with grace and skill. She imagined the prince watching her, admiring her efforts, and choosing her as the winner. It was a dream that seemed impossible, but it was a dream nonetheless. When the chores were finally done for the day, and Nkechi and Ijeoma had retired to their rooms, Adamma lay down on her mat in the kitchen. She was exhausted, as always, but tonight, she had something new to think about. She whispered a prayer to her parents, asking them to watch over her and guide her through whatever was to come. "Papa, Mama," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "Please help me. I want to do well in the competition. I want to make you proud." With that, she closed her eyes, the tiny spark of hope still burning in her heart. For the first time in a long while, Adamma allowed herself to dream of a better future, one where she was no longer just the poor orphan girl living under Nkechi's roof, but a maiden of Umunze with a chance to change her life. And so, as the moon rose high in the sky, Adamma drifted off to sleep, her mind filled with thoughts of the upcoming competition and the possibilities it held. In her dreams, she was strong, brave, and capable, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The competition was her chance, a chance to change her destiny. And no matter what happened, Adamma knew that she had to try. In the evening of the next day, the breeze rustled through the tall palm trees surrounding the royal palace of Umunze, carrying with it the scent of freshly cut grass and blooming flowers. Inside the grand palace, King Obidike sat in his private chamber, his thoughts occupied with the upcoming event. The king's mind was heavy with the responsibilities that came with his position. But tonight, his thoughts were centered on one thing: the return of his son, Prince Ozo. As he sat in his large, intricately carved wooden chair, the king reached for his phone, his fingers brushing against the smooth surface. As he dialed his son's number, the phone rang twice before Prince Uzo's voice came through the speaker, clear and strong. "Nnam, which means my father," Uzo greeted warmly. It's good to hear your voice, Nnam. And yours too, my son, the king replied, a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. I trust all is well with you. Yes, Nnam, everything is fine, Uzo assured him. How are things at home? How is Umunze? Umunze is as it has always been, my son, the king said, his tone a mix of pride. The village thrives, but it eagerly awaits your return. The people have missed their prince. I have missed them too, Nnam, Uzo said sincerely, and I am looking forward to coming home. When do you need me back? The king hesitated for a moment, knowing that the next words would change the course of his son's life. I would like you to return as soon as possible. The competition to find you a wife is about to begin, and it is important that you are here. Uzo was silent for a moment, absorbing his father's words. He had known this day was coming, but now that it was here, the reality of it settled over him like a heavy cloak. I understand, Nnam. I will make arrangements to return as soon as possible. Good, the king said, relieved. But Uzo, there is something we must discuss before you come home. What is it, father? Uzo asked, his curiosity piqued. It's about the competition, the king began carefully. As you know, my son, it is a tradition in Umunze for the prince to choose his wife through a series of tests. The maidens of the village will compete in various challenges, and the one who proves herself worthy will become your bride. But Uzo, I want you to approach this with the seriousness it deserves. The woman you choose will be by your side for the rest of your life, as your partner and as the future queen. I understand that, Nnam, Uzo replied thoughtfully, and that is why I have a request. The king raised an eyebrow, intrigued. A request? What do you have in mind, Uzo? Father, Uzo began slowly, choosing his words with care. I want to participate in the competition, but not as the prince. I do not want the maidens to know who I am until after the competition is over. King Obidike was taken aback by his son's words. Not as a prince? Uzo, why would you want to hide your identity? Uzo took a deep breath before answering. Father, I have seen how people change when they know they are in the presence of royalty. They put on a show, saying and doing what they think will please the prince. But it's not always genuine. I want to see the true intentions of the maidens, to know who they really are. If they think I am just a palace servant, they will behave more naturally, and I will be able to make a better choice. The king considered his son's words carefully. He understood Uzo's concern, but he also saw the potential risks in such a plan. But Uzo, the king said, his voice laced with caution, deception is a dangerous game. What if things do not go as planned? What if the maidens find out the truth? I have thought about that, father, Uzo replied, and I believe this is the best way to find a woman who will love me for who I am, not just for my title. I want a wife who is kind, honest, and sincere, not someone who is just after the crown. The king sighed, rubbing his temple as he thought through his son's proposal. And how do you intend to conceal your identity? I have a plan for that as well, Uzo said confidently. When I return, I will take on the role of the palace chef. It is a position that will allow me to interact with the maidens without drawing too much attention. They will think I am just another servant, and I will be able to observe them closely. The palace chef? The king repeated, a hint of amusement in his voice. Uzo, cooking is not an easy task. How will you manage? I have learned a few things during my time abroad, father. Uzo replied with a small chuckle, and I will have the real chefs to guide me. I only need to play the role convincingly enough to avoid suspicion. King Obidike couldn't help but smile at his son's determination. Uzo had always been resourceful and clever, and this plan was a testament to those qualities. And what's of your identity as the prince? The king asked. How will you explain your absence during the competition? Father, that is where my best friend Obina comes in, Uzo replied. Obina has agreed to help me. He will take on the role of the prince for the duration of the competition. He will be introduced to the maidens and the judges as the prince, while I remain in the background as the chef. The king was silent for a long moment, processing his son's words. It was an unconventional plan, but it had a certain brilliance to it. By hiding his identity, Uzo would be able to see the maidens for who they truly were without the influence of his title. And you are certain this is what you want to do? The king asked finally. There is no turning back once the competition begins. I am certain, Nnam, Uzo replied firmly. This is the only way I can be sure that the maiden I choose is sincere. I want a partner who will stand by me through thick and thin, not someone who is only interested in the crown. King Obidike nodded slowly, recognizing the determination in his son's voice. He could see that Uzo had made up his mind, and there was no dissuading him. With a deep breath, the king gave his consent. Very well, Nwam. If this is what you wish, then I will support you. But you must be careful. Deception can lead to unforeseen consequences, and you must be prepared for whatever comes your way. Thank you, Nnam, Uzo said, his voice filled with gratitude. I promise I will be cautious. The king leaned back in his chair, still pondering the implication of his son's plan. When do you plan to return, my son? Soon, father, Uzo replied. Good, the king said with a nod. We will make the necessary arrangements. The competition will begin in a few days, so you must be prepared. I'll be ready, Nnam, Uzo assured him. And father, thank you for understanding. Of course, my son, the king replied warmly. You have always been a wise and thoughtful young man. I trust you will make the right decision. After ending the call, Prince Uzo sat back in his chair, his mind buzzing with excitement and anticipation. He knew that the coming days would be challenging, but he was ready to face whatever came his way. The thought of disguising himself as the palace chef and observing the maidens without them knowing who he was filled him with a sense of purpose. This was his choice to find a true partner, someone who would love him for who he was, not for his title. Uzo reached out to his best friend Obina, who had been by his side through thick and thin. Obina was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a warm smile and an easygoing nature. When Uzo explained his plan, Obina listened intently, nodding in agreement. I see what you are trying to do, Uzo, Obina said thoughtfully, and I agree, it's a good plan. I will do my best in playing the role of the prince. But are you sure you want to go through with this? I am sure, Uzo replied confidently. This is the only way I can be certain about the maiden's true intentions. I trust you to play the role well, Obina. You have always been there for me, and I know I can count on you. Obina smiled, clapping Uzo on the shoulder. You can count on me, Uzo. I will make sure everything goes smoothly. But remember, you will be in the kitchen, so don't burn anything. Uzo laughed, feeling a sense of relief, with Obina by his side. He knew that the plan would work. The competition would soon begin, and Uzo was ready to find the woman who would share his life, not because of his title, but because of who he truly was. The day the news broke, it was as if a gust of wind had swept through the village of Umunze, carrying with it an electrifying buzz that crackled in the air like dry leaves scattered in the wind. The word spread quickly, leaping from house to house, from mouth to mouth, and by midday, the entire village was alive with chatter. Prince Uzo is returning, a market woman exclaimed, her voice rising above the clamor of the marketplace. She slapped her neighbor on the back, grinning widely. He's coming back to choose a wife, and the competition will soon begin. At the sound of her words, the women in the marketplace paused in their haggling. The children stopped their play, and even the elders, who rarely engaged in such excitement, looked up with curiosity. Is it true? One of the older women asked, her voice thick with skepticism. Or is this just another rumor? Ezioku, which means it's the truth. The market woman insisted, waving her hand dismissively. I heard it straight from the palace servant's mouth. The prince will be here any day now. As the news continued to spread, it was met with varying reactions. The young men of the village puffed out their chests and straightened their shoulders, hoping to impress the prince when he arrived. The elders spoke in hushed tones, reminiscing about the last time such an event had taken place and what it meant for the future of Umunze. But it was the maidens of the village who were mostly affected by the news. They giggled and whispered among themselves, each one secretly hoping that she would be the one to capture the prince's heart. The competition was not just an opportunity to win the prince's favor. It was a chance to secure a future, to bring honor to one's family, and to become a queen. The maidens continued their preparation, each one doing her best to enhance her natural beauty and charm. They wore their finest clothes, braided hair with intricate designs, and practiced their best smiles in front of their mirrors. The excitement was palpable, and for a brief moment, every maiden in Umunze dared to dream. Even in Aunty Nkechi's household, the excitement was impossible to ignore. Nkechi had heard the news from one of the neighbors and had immediately turned her attention to her daughter, Ijoma. Ijoma! Nkechi called out as she entered the house, her voice sharp with urgency. Come here at once. Ijoma, who had been sitting idly in the living room, quickly stood up and hurried to her mother's side. Yes, Nne, what is it? She asked, her tone a mix of curiosity and concern. Have you heard the news? Nkechi asked, her eyes narrowing as she studied her daughter. What news, Nne? Ijoma replied, a frown creasing her forehead. The prince of Umunze is coming back soon, Nkechi said, slowly, watching as her daughter's eyes widened with realization. And there will be a competition to choose his wife. Ijeoma gasped, her heart leaping with excitement. Really? Nne? A competition? Yes, Nkechi confirmed, a slight smile tugging at her lips. And you must prepare yourself. This is your chance, Ijeoma. You must do everything you can to win the prince's favor. I will, Mama, Ijeoma promised, her voice filled with determination. I will make sure the prince chooses me. Nkechi nodded approvingly, already formulating a plan in her mind. Good. We will start by getting you some new clothes. You must look your best at all times. The competition will not be easy, but I know you can do it. As Ijeoma and her mother began to discuss their preparations, Adamma stood quietly in the corner of the room, listening to their conversation. She had heard the news as well, and while a small part of her felt a flicker of hope, she knew that she had no chance of participating in the competition. Auntie Nkechi would never allow it. Adamma! Nkechi's voice snapped Adamma out of her thoughts. What are you standing there for? Go and fetch some water, you this silly girl. Yes, Auntie, Adamma replied softly, bowing her head as she hurried out of the house. As she made her way to the village stream, Adamma's thoughts were a whirlwind of emotions. She had always dreamed of a better life. One where she was free from the cruelty of her aunt and cousin. But she knew that such dreams were foolish. She was just a servant in her own home, and the competition was meant for the maidens of noble birth, not someone like her. Meanwhile, far from the village of Umunze, Prince Uzo and his best friend Obinna were making their final preparations for their return. The two young men had spent the past few days discussing their plan, refining every detail to ensure that nothing would go wrong. Are you sure about this, Uzo? Obinna asked, as he folded a shirt and placed it into his suitcase. Pretending to be someone else, it's kind of risky. I'm sure, Uzo replied, his tone firm. I need to know the true intentions of the maidens. I don't want someone who is only interested in my title or wealth. I want a wife who will love me for who I am, not for what I can give her. Obinna nodded, understanding his friend's reasoning. And you think pretending to be the palace chef will help you find that? Yes, Uzo said with a slight smile. As the palace chef, I'll be able to observe the maidens without them knowing who really I am. I will see how they treat those they believe are beneath them, and I will know who is truly kind-hearted. And what about me? Obinna asked with a grin. Are you sure I can pull off pretending to be a prince? You will do just fine, Uzo said, clapping his friend on the shoulder. Just remember to act confident and don't let anyone question your authority. The villagers won't suspect anything as long as we stick to the plan. Perhaps I was just a little boy when I left the village, so don't worry, no one knows me in person. With their bags packed and their plan set, the two friends boarded a plane bound for Nigeria, their hearts filled with anticipation for what lay ahead. As the plane touched down at the airport, Uzo and Obinna exchanged a knowing look. The next few weeks would be a test of their resolve, but they were ready for whatever challenges came their way. Back in Umunze, the palace was a hive of activity as preparations for the prince's return reached a fever pitch. The palace staff worked tirelessly, cleaning and decorating every corner of the grand estate. The walls were scrubbed until they shone, the floors polished a mirror-like finish, and fresh flowers were arranged in every room. The palace cooks were especially busy, preparing a feast that would rival any banquet held in the kingdom. Pots of soup simmered on the stove, the aroma of spices filling the air, while trays of jollof rice, roasted meat, and fresh fruit were carefully arranged on long tables. King Obidike oversaw the preparations with a watchful eye, making sure that everything was perfect for his son's return. He had always taken great pride in his palace, and he wanted to ensure that it was a place worthy of his son's homecoming. "Is everything ready?" the king asked one of the palace stewards as he walked through the grand hall. "Almost, Your Majesty," the steward replied with a bow. "The final touches are being made, and the guest rooms are being prepared for the prince and his friend." "Good," the king said with a nod. "Make sure the prince's chamber is especially comfortable. He has had a long journey and he will need his rest." As the preparation continued, the excitement in the palace grew. The guards stood a little straighter, the servants moved a little faster, and everyone was on high alert for the moment when the prince would return. But what none of them knew was that the man they were preparing for, the man they believed to be the prince, was not who he seemed. The real Prince Uzo would arrive not as the honored guest, but as a humble palace chef, hidden in plain sight. As afternoon drew closer, the anticipation in Umunze reached its peak. The villagers lined the street, eager to catch a glimpse of the royal procession. The maidens, dressed in their finest clothes, stood in groups, whispering excitedly and stealing glances at one another, each hoping to outshine the rest. In the midst of all this excitement, Aunty Nkechi and Ijoma prepared themselves for the competition. Nkechi had managed to borrow a beautiful dress for Ijoma, and she spent hours fusing over her daughter's appearance, making sure that every detail was perfect. "You must be perfect, Ijoma," Nkechi said as she adjusted the folds of the dress. "The prince must see that you are the most beautiful and deserving maiden in the village." "I will do my best, Nne," Ijoma replied, her voice filled with determination. She looked at her reflection in the small cracked mirror that hung on the wall, admiring the way the dress hugged her figure. The fabric shimmered in the light, and the colors complemented her smooth dark skin. She knew she looked beautiful, but deep down, a tiny seed of doubt gnawed at her. What if the other maidens were more beautiful? What if the prince didn't even notice her? But Nkechi would hear none of it. "Nwam, Chukwu ga-edu gi," which means that God will lead her, she said, waving away Ijoma's unspoken fears. "You are the most beautiful maiden in Umunze. If the prince has eyes, he will see that." Adamma watched silently as Nkechi fussed over Ijoma, her heart heavy with a mixture of emotions. She wished she could be as excited as the other maidens, but she knew better than to hope for things that could never be. She knew her place, and it wasn't among the maidens vying for the prince's attention. With a sigh, she turned and went back to her chores, trying to push the excitement of the village from her mind. As the villagers prepared to welcome the prince Prince Uzo and his friend Obinna were already on their way back to Umunze, their hearts filled with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. They had left the bustling city life behind, trading the luxury and comfort of their lives abroad for the simplicity of village life, at least for the time being. "We are almost there," Obinna said, glancing out of the window of the car they had rented. The road ahead was lined with tall trees, their branches swaying gently in the evening breeze. "Are you ready for this, Uzo?" Prince Uzo smiled, though there was a hint of uncertainty in his eyes. "I am," he replied, nodding. "I just hope the plan works. If the maidens know who I really am, they might act differently. I need to see them for who they truly are, not for who they think I am. And that's why I am here," Obinna said with a grin. "I will play the part of the prince, and you can be the palace chef. No one will suspect a thing." The two friends laughed, their spirits lifting as they neared the village. They knew that the next few weeks would be a challenge, but they were ready for it. They were determined to find the one maiden who was worthy of being queen of Umunze. And they knew that the only way to do that was to test the heart of the maidens without revealing their true identities. As they entered the village, the streets were lined with people, their faces filled with excitement and curiosity. The villagers had heard of the prince's arrival, and they had all come out to greet him. They waved palm fronds and cheered as the car drove by, their voices rising in a joyful chorus. "No, no," which means "welcome, welcome," they shouted, their smiles wide and genuine. The excitement was palpable, and the air buzzed with energy as the villagers caught their first glimpse of the car that carried the prince. Inside the car, Obinna straightened his shoulders and took a deep breath. "Here we go," he muttered under his breath, his heart pounding in his chest. He waved at the villagers through the window, trying his best to look regal and composed. Prince Uzo, who was sitting beside him, did the same, though with a little more ease. He knew that all eyes were on Obinna, and he could relax a bit, playing the part of the humble companion. As the car came to a stop in front of the palace gate, the villagers gathered around, their faces filled with admiration. The palace guards quickly moved to control the crowd, ensuring that the prince and his companion had enough space to exit the vehicle. The palace gate creaked open, revealing the grand estate that lay beyond. The villagers gasped in admiration as they caught the sight of the palace, its walls gleaming in the fading light of the setting sun. The air was filled with the sweet scent of flowers, and the sound of birds singing softly in the trees added to the magical atmosphere. Obinna stepped out of the car first, his heart racing as he felt the weight of the villagers' gazes on him. He smiled politely, trying to hide his nervousness. He knew that he had to play his part well. One misstep, and their plan would be ruined. Prince Uzo followed suit, stepping out of the car with a calm and composed demeanor. He knew that in the eyes of the villagers, he was just a common person, and intended to keep it that way. He glanced around, taking in the familiar sight and sounds of his home. As the two friends walked towards the palace entrance, the villagers bowed respectfully, their eyes filled with admiration. They whispered among themselves, speculating about the prince and his companion, each one eager to know more about the man who would soon choose a wife from among their daughters. King Obidike stood at the entrance of the palace, his heart swelling with pride as he watched the young men approach. He had always been proud of his son, and now, seeing him return after so many years, that pride was almost overwhelming. "No, Nwam, welcome, my child," the king said, his voice warm and filled with affection as he embraced Obinna, who was pretending to be the prince. He then turned to Uzo, who bowed respectfully. "Your Majesty," Uzo said, his voice steady and calm. "Welcome home, both of you," the king said, beaming with pride. He then motioned for the palace guards to open the doors, allowing the two friends to enter the grand hall. As they walked through the palace, the staff bowed and curtsied, their faces filled with admiration and respect. None of them suspected that the real prince was among them, disguised as a humble companion. The king led them to the dining hall, where a feast had been prepared in their honor. The table was laden with all sorts of delicious dishes, from steaming pots of soup, to platters of roasted meat and fresh fruit, to trays of jollof rice. The aroma filled the air, making their mouths water. "Please, sit," the king said, motioning to the seats at the head of the table. Obinna took his place at the head, while Uzo sat beside him, playing his part as the loyal companion. As they ate, the conversation flowed easily, the king asking about their journey and their plans for the coming weeks. Obinna answered with confidence, keeping up the charade, while Uzo listened quietly, occasionally adding a word or two. After the meal, the king showed them to their chambers, making sure that everything was to their liking. "I hope you find your rooms comfortable," he said with a smile. "If there is anything you need, do not hesitate to ask." "Thank you, Your Majesty," Obinna said, bowing respectfully. The king then bid them good night, leaving them to settle into their rooms. As soon as the door closed behind them, Obinna let out a sigh of relief, sinking into the plush bed. "That was intense," he muttered, rubbing his temples. "You did well," Uzo said with a grin, sitting down on the edge of the bed. No one suspected a thing. Obinna chuckled, though there was a hint of nervousness in his laughter. "Let's hope it stays that way." The next morning, the village was once again alive with activity. The news of the prince's arrival had spread like wildfire, and the villagers were eager to catch another glimpse of the young man who would soon choose a wife from among their daughters. The maidens were especially excited, each one hoping that she would be the one to win the prince's heart. They spent hours in front of their mirrors, trying on different outfits and practicing their best smiles, each one determined to outshine the rest. But little did they know that the man they believed to be the prince was not who he seemed. As they prepared for the competition, the real prince watched from the shadows, his identity hidden behind the humble guise of a palace companion. As the day wore on, the villagers gathered in the town square, eager to greet the prince and his companion as they made their way to the market. The air was filled with excitement, the buzz of conversation and laughter echoing through the streets. When Obinna and Uzo finally appeared, the crowd erupted in cheers, the villagers waving and calling out greetings as the two friends made their way through the throng. Obinna smiled and waved, playing the part of the prince with ease, while Uzo walked beside him, his face calm and composed. The villagers continued to cheer and wave, their faces filled with admiration as they watched the two young men pass by. They had no idea that they were greeting the wrong man. their cheers and smiles directed at the one who was not the true prince. Finally, after what felt like hours, the crowd began to disperse. The villagers returning to their homes with smiles on their faces and excitement in their hearts. They had seen the prince, and they couldn't wait for the competition. The village of Umunze was buzzing with excitement as the much anticipated competition drew nearer. The maidens, each with dreams of becoming the prince's bride, were already deep in preparation. Every corner of the village seemed to echo with the sound of laughter, the swish of rappers, and the rhythm of drums. While some maidens were busily preparing, others were more relaxed. Ugochi, a tall and graceful maiden with deep brown eyes, sat quietly by herself, humming a soft tune. She wasn't one to stress over appearances or worry about what the other girls were doing. Instead, she believed that if the prince were destined to choose her, then it would happen naturally. Aren't you worried about the competition? A voice interrupted her thoughts. It was Amaka, a friend of hers, who had been watching from afar. Ugochi smiled. Not really, Amaka. What will be, will be. I can't change my fate, and worrying won't help. I will just be myself and see what happens. Amaka nodded thoughtfully, admiring Ugochi's calmness. It was true that the competition was on everyone's mind, but each maiden approached it in her own way. Some focused on dance, others on beauty, and a few like Ugochi trusted in fate. Meanwhile, in the grand palace, preparations of a different kind were underway. The halls echoed with the sounds of busy footsteps and hushed conversations as the palace staff ensured that everything was in perfect order. The walls gleamed with freshly polished wood, and the scent of flowers filled the air, making the palace feel alive with anticipation. King Obidike, dressed in his royal attire, walked through the palace with a purposeful stride. His robe, adorned with intricate designs, billowed behind him as he was accompanied by members of the council, the Onowu, and the chiefs. The king's expression was serious as he spoke, and everyone listened intently to his words. The upcoming competition is a momentous event, the king began, his voice resonating with authority. It's not just about choosing a bride for the prince, but about selecting the future queen of Umunze. Every detail must be meticulously planned, and every decision must be made with care. The council nodded in agreement, their eyes reflecting the gravity of the occasion. They knew that this competition was not just a simple event, it was a turning point for the future of Umunze. I have given instructions for the recruitment of new palace staff, the king continued, his eyes scanning the room to ensure that everyone was paying attention. This includes additional palace chefs who will prepare meals for the maidens during their stay. We must ensure that they are well cared for and that their time here is both comfortable and memorable. One of the chiefs, an elderly man with a long white beard, spoke up. Your Majesty, have you selected the judges for the competition? Their role will be crucial in determining the outcome. King Obidike nodded thoughtfully. Yes, I have. The judges will be chosen from among most respected elders in the village, as well as the trusted advisors from the palace. They must be individuals of integrity and wisdom, capable of making fair and unbiased decisions. Their judgment will be final. As the king spoke, a young man entered the room, drawing the attention of everyone present. It was Obina, disguised as the prince, his demeanor calm and composed. He was dressed in a royal attire, his posture regal and commanding, but there was a warmth in his eyes that immediately put those around him at ease. "Your Highness," the king said with a welcoming smile, extending his hand to the young man, "allow me to introduce you to the members of the council, the Onowu, and the chiefs of Umunze. These are the men who will support you as you prepare for the competition." Obinna bowed respectfully, his voice steady as he spoke. "It's an honor to meet you all. I look forward to working together to ensure that this competition is a success." The council members and chiefs returned the bow, their expressions filled with respect. They had heard much about the prince's wisdom and leadership, and they were eager to see him fulfill his role in this important event. King Obidike gestured for Obinna to join them at the large table in the center of the room. "Please, Your Highness, sit with us. We are just discussing the details of the competition." As they took their seats, the king continued to outline the plans for the competition. The event will span several days, with each maiden given the opportunity to showcase their talent, skills, and character. The rounds will include dance, traditional skills, and personal interviews, where the judges will assess their qualities and suitability as a future queen. Prince Obinna listened carefully, absorbing every detail. Although he was playing the role of the prince, he knew that the real Prince Uzo's future and the future of Umunze depended on the success of this plan. "The final round," the king said, his tone growing more serious, "will be the most critical. The maidens would be given a task that tests their patience, kindness, and problem-solving abilities. This will be their opportunity to demonstrate the qualities that made a true queen: wisdom, compassion, and strength of character." The room was silent as everyone considered the weight of the king's words. They all understood that this competition was about more than just beauty or skill. It was about finding the right person to lead alongside the prince, someone who would guide Umunze into a prosperous future. As the discussion continued, the king emphasized the importance of fairness and integrity. He wanted to ensure that every maiden had an equal chance to prove herself, and that the decision would be based solely on merit. Finally, as the meeting drew to a close, King Obidike rose from his seat. His expression was one of solemn determination. "We are about to embark on a journey that will shape the future of Umunze. Let us proceed with wisdom and honor, ensuring that every decision we make reflects our commitment to this great responsibility." The council members and chiefs nodded in agreement, their faces serious as they prepared to leave the room. The king's words echoed in their minds, reminding them of the significance of the task ahead. As the others began to file out of the room, the king turned to Obinna, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Your Highness, I trust you will make the right choice. Remember, this is not just about finding a bride. It's about finding a partner who will rule by your side with wisdom and grace." Obinna nodded, feeling the weight of the responsibilities on his shoulders. "I understand, Your Majesty. I will do my best to fulfill my duty and make a choice that honors the future of Umunze." With the meeting concluded, the king stepped out into the courtyard, where the town crier was waiting. The town crier, a man with a powerful voice that could carry across the village, bowed deeply as the king approached. "Go to every corner of Umunze," the king instructed. "Announce to the people that they must prepare their daughters for the upcoming competition. In 2 market days, every maiden is expected to gather at the palace for the start of the event. Let no one be left uninformed. The town crier nodded, understanding the importance of his task. He picked up his gong and with a loud clang began his announcement. His voice rang out across the village, carrying the king's message to every home. Geenụ ntị o! Geenụ ntị o! The town crier cried out, capturing the attention of everyone, young and old alike. His gong clanged with each declaration, sending ripples of anticipation through the air. By order of King Obidike, let it be known that in 2 market days, a grand competition will begin at the palace. Every maiden of marriageable age is required to attend. Prepare your daughters, for the prince seek a bride. As he made his way from one end of the village to the other, the people of Umunze listened intently. Mothers hurried to their daughters, making sure they were ready for what was to come. Fathers, too, looked on with pride, hopeful that their daughters might have a chance to win the heart of the prince. Children followed the town crier as he walked, their eyes wide with curiosity. They whispered among themselves, excitedly sharing stories they had heard about the prince and his upcoming search for a bride. Some of the older girls began to dream, imagining what it would be like to be chosen, to wear the royal crown, and to live in the grand palace. In the fastest corners of the village, where the huts were fewer and the trees grew taller, the town criers reached even those who lived in seclusion. The news spread quickly, carried by word of mouth, until every family knew of the upcoming event. In the palace, King Obidike retired to his private chambers, his mind heavy with the responsibilities that lay ahead. He knew that the competition was only the beginning of a long journey, one that would shape the future of Umunze for generations to come. As he sat by the window, gazing out at the stars that dotted the night sky, the king's thoughts turned to his son, Prince Uzo. He hoped that Uzo would find not just a wife, but a partner, someone who would stand by his side through the challenges and triumphs of life. The king sighed, feeling the weight of his role as a father and a leader. He knew that the decision they were about to make would have far-reaching consequences, not just for Uzo, but for the entire village. Meanwhile, in a secluded corner of the palace, Obinna, who was playing the role of the prince, sat quietly, lost in thought. He had always been a loyal friend to Prince Uzo, and now he found himself in an unusual position, one that required him to be both conscious and wise. As he prepared for the days ahead, Obinna knew that the task before him was no small one. He would need to observe the maidens closely, understanding their true character, all while maintaining his disguise. It was a delicate balance, but one he was determined to uphold. As the night grew deeper, the palace grew quiet, with only the occasional sound of footsteps echoing through the halls. The preparations for the competition were in full swing, and every detail was being carefully attended to. The next 2 market days would determine everything, and in the quiet of night, the stars seemed to twinkle a little brighter, as if they too were watching, waiting to see what the dawn would bring. The day that everyone in the village of Umunze had been eagerly anticipating had finally arrived. The day of the competition. From the break of dawn, The entire village buzzed with excitement and anticipation. Every household was alive with activity as mothers and fathers bid their daughters farewell, reminding them of the great honor that could be brought to their family if they performed well. In one house, a mother held her daughter's hands, her voice both stern and loving as she spoke. Amaka, do not bring shame to this family. Remember who you are and where you come from. We are all counting on you. Across the village, similar scenes were playing out in every home. The maidens carefully packed their boxes with their finest clothes, jewelry, and all the essentials they would need during their stay at the palace. Some of the girls were nervous, while others were filled with excitement at the possibility of becoming the prince's bride. It was a day that would change the lives of many, and no one wanted to miss the opportunity. In Nkechi's household, the atmosphere was no different. Ijeoma was busy packing her things, her face set in determination. She carefully selected her best outfits, making sure to include the ones that would show off her beauty. She was certain that she would win the prince's heart, and nothing was going to stand in her way. Ijeoma, make sure you pack everything you need, Auntie Nkechi said, watching her daughter with pride. You must not bring shame to this family. Go and win this competition and make us proud. I will, Nne, Ijeoma replied confidently. She finished packing her things and closed her box with a satisfied smile. While Ijeoma prepared to leave for the palace, Adamma was in the corner, quietly doing her chores. She scrubbed the floor with a rag, her heart heavy with sadness. She had dreamed of going to the palace, of participating in the competition, and perhaps even winning the prince's heart. But Auntie Nkechi had forbidden her from going, saying that she was not worthy. Adamma tried to focus on her work, but it was difficult. Her heart ached with disappointment, and she felt tears welling up in her eyes. She didn't dare to cry, though, for she knew that it would only anger Auntie Nkechi even more. As Ijeoma finished preparing, she glanced at Adamma, a smile on her face. You should clean up faster, Adamma. The competition is starting soon, and you wouldn't want to be caught slacking off. Adamma bit her lip, trying to hold back the tears. Yes, Ijeoma, she said quietly, continuing to scrub the floor. With the box packed and ready, Ijeoma left the house without another word. Her head held high. She walked with purpose, knowing that she was about to embark on the most important journey of her life. As she walked through the village, she saw other maidens heading towards the palace as well, each one dressed in their finest clothes and carrying their own boxes. Some of them exchanged nervous glances, while others chatted excitedly about what lay ahead. When Ijeoma finally arrived at the palace, she was in shock of the grandness of the building. The palace stood tall and majestic, its walls adorned with beautiful carvings and decorations that spoke of the rich history of the kingdom. The gates were wide open, and the path leading to the entrance was lined with flowers that filled the air with their sweet fragrance. Ijeoma joined the other maidens who had already arrived and were starting to settle down. She placed her box on the ground and looked around, taking in her surroundings. Everything was perfect, and she felt a surge of confidence. This was where she belonged. Ijeoma, one of the maidens called out, waving her over. Come and sit with us. Ijeoma smiled and walked over to join the group. She felt like a queen already, surrounded by girls who admired her beauty and grace. But just as she was about to sit down, she reached into her pocket to check her phone, only to realize that it wasn't there. Panic flashed across her face as she searched through her belongings. It was nowhere to be found. Oh no, Ijeoma muttered under her breath. I must have left it at home. Back at Aunty Nkechi's house, Adamma had finished her chores and retreated to her tiny room. It was a small cramped space with barely enough room for her to lie down. She sat on the edge of her tin mattress, staring at the wall in silence. The sadness she had been holding back all morning finally overwhelmed her, and she buried her face in her hands, letting the tears flow freely. As she cried, she couldn't help but imagine what it would be like to be at the palace, dressed in beautiful clothes and surrounded by other maidens. She thought of the competition, of the chance to win the prince's heart and change her life forever. But all that was out of her reach, and the reality of her situation hit her like a crushing weight. Adamma! Aunty Nkechi's voice suddenly rang out from the other room. Adamma quickly wiped her tears and stood up, her heart pounding. She hurried out of her room and went to find her aunt, who was standing in the middle of the living room, looking irritated. Yes, Auntie, Adamma said, keeping her eyes on the floor. Ijeoma forgot her phone. Aunty Nkechi said, holding up the device. You need to take it to her at the palace. And don't waste time there. Do you hear me? Go straight there and come back immediately, or else you will be punished. Adamma nodded quickly, taking the phone from her aunt's hand. Yes, Auntie, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Go on then, Nkechi said, waving her off, and make sure you are back before the sun sets. Without another word, Adamma left the house, clutching the phone tightly in her hand. She felt a mix of emotions as she walked towards the palace. She was nervous about going there, but at the same time, she was grateful for the opportunity, even if it was just to deliver a forgotten phone. When she finally reached the palace gate, she hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do. The palace was even more magnificent up close, and she felt like she didn't belong there. But she had a job to do, and she knew that she couldn't turn back now. She approached the gatekeeper, a tall, stern-looking man who was standing by the entrance. He glanced at her, his expression hardening as she took in her appearance. Good day, sir, Adamma said softly, bowing her head respectfully. My name is Adamma. I'm here to deliver my cousin Ijeoma's phone. She forgot it at home. The gatekeeper raised an eyebrow, his eyes narrowing as he looked her up and down. He seemed reluctant to let her in, his hand resting on the gate as if he was about to close it in her face. You say you are here to deliver a phone? He asked, his tone skeptical. Yes, sir, Adama replied, her voice steady. Auntie Nkechi sent me. I promise I won't stay long. I just need to give her the phone and leave. The gatekeeper studied her for a moment, noting her politeness and the respect she had shown him, something the other maidens had not bothered with. He sighed and stepped aside, opening the gate for her. All right, go in, he said, though his tone was still wary. But don't cause any trouble. Thank you, sir, Adama said, bowing her head again before stepping through the gate. As she walked into the palace grounds, Adama couldn't help but marvel at the beauty around. The gardens were lush and vibrant, filled with colorful flowers that seemed to dance in the breeze. The palace itself was even more magnificent up close, with tall pillars and intricate carvings that spoke of its rich history. Adama felt out of place, like a small plain stone among glittering jewels, but she reminded herself that she was here only to deliver a phone and then leave. She had no place in the competition, no matter how much she wished otherwise. As she made her way through the palace, she kept her head down, avoiding the gazes of the other maidens who were already settling in. They were dressed in their finest clothes, their hair styled to perfection, and their faces bright with excitement. Adama felt their eyes on her as she passed, and she heard their whispers, murmurs of curiosity and disdain. She tried to ignore them, focusing instead on finding Ijoma. But just as she rounded a corner, she bumped into someone. She stumbled back, almost dropping the phone in her hand. I'm so sorry, Adama exclaimed, looking up quickly, her breath caught in her throat when she saw who she had run into. As Adama looked up, her heart skipped a beat. She had just bumped into a tall young man, dressed in the simple clothes of a palace servant. His eyes were kind, and his smile warm, but there was something about him that Adama felt both nervous and comforted at the same time. I'm so sorry, Adama said again, her voice trembling slightly. She quickly stepped back, bowing her head as she tried to avoid eye contact. I didn't mean to bump into you. I'm just here to give my cousin her phone. I'll be out of your way as soon as I find her. The young man looked at her curiously, his head tilted to one side. It's all right, he replied gently, his voice soothing. No harm done. What's your name? Adama hesitated, surprised by his kindness. Most people barely noticed her, and when they did, it wasn't to ask for her name. My name is Adama, she said quietly, still keeping her eyes on the ground. I'm here to give my cousin Ijoma her phone. She forgot it at home. Prince Uzo, who was in disguise as one of the palace chefs, nodded thoughtfully. He was intrigued by the girl standing before him. Unlike the other maidens who had arrived at the palace, this girl was different. She wasn't dressed in fancy clothes, and she didn't have the same air of confidence or arrogance that the others did. Instead, there was a humility about her that caught his attention. Adama, Uzo repeated, as if testing how the name sounded on his lips. It's a beautiful name. Do you know where to find your cousin? Or would you like me to show you the way? Adama looked up at him for the first time, her eyes wide with surprise. You would help me? She asked, hardly able to believe that a palace servant, who she assumed he was, would offer to assist someone like her. Uzo smiled and nodded. Of course, I'm more than happy to help. Adama's heart swelled with gratitude. She had expected to be turned away or ignored, but instead, this kind young man was offering to help her. "Thank you," she said, her voice full of sincerity. "I really appreciate this." Uzo gestured for her to follow him, and together they walked through the palace corridors. As they moved, Adama couldn't help but glance around. The palace was even more beautiful on the inside than it was on the outside. The floors were polished to a shine, and the walls were decorated with tapestries that depicted the history of their land. Adama felt a pang of longing as she looked around. How wonderful it would have been to stay here, to be part of the competition. But she quickly pushed those thoughts away. She was here for a reason, and she couldn't let herself get distracted. As they walked, Uzo couldn't help but notice how Adama's eyes lit up as she looked in her surroundings. There was an innocence and a sense of wonder about her that he found refreshing. It was so different from the attitude of the other girls, who seemed to think that they were already queens. "So, Adama," Uzo said, breaking the silence, "why aren't you participating in the competition? You seem like you would be a strong contender." Adama's face fell at his words. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The thought of participating in the competition was nothing more than a distant dream. "I'm not allowed," she said, trying to keep the sadness out of her voice. "My auntie said I'm not worthy to join. I'm just here to deliver the phone and then go back home." Uzo frowned slightly, his heart going out to her. "Not worthy?" he repeated, a hint of disbelief in his voice. "Why would anyone say that?" Adama shrugged, feeling a lump form in her throat. She didn't want to get into details of how she was treated at home, but it was clear that this young man didn't understand why someone like her would be considered unworthy. "It's just the way things are," she said softly, her eyes cast down once more. As they approached, the sound of chatter and laughter filled the air. The girls were busy settling in, arranging their belongings and chatting excitedly about the competition. The atmosphere was vibrant, full of energy and anticipation. When they reached the entrance to the room, Uzo turned to Adama. "This is where the girls are staying," he said. "Your cousin should be in here. Would you like me to go in with you?" Adama shook her head quickly, not wanting to cause any more trouble. "No, thank you," she said. "You have already been so kind. I can manage from here." Uzo smiled at her, nodding in understanding. "All right then. I'm sure your cousin will be happy to see you. But remember, if you need any help, don't hesitate to ask." "Thank you," Adama said again, her voice full of gratitude. She couldn't believe how kind this young man was. It was as if he could see right through her, past her worn clothes and tired eyes, and into her heart. It made her feel seen, truly seen, for the first time in a long while. With a deep breath, Adama stepped into the room, clutching the phone in her hand. As she walked in, the chatter among the girls quieted for a moment, and all eyes turned to her. Adama felt a wave of self-consciousness wash over her as she realized how out of place she looked among the finely dressed maidens. But she kept her head high, remembering the kindness of the young man who had helped her. She scanned the room searching for Ijoma, and soon spotted her cousin sitting with a group of girls, laughing and talking as if she didn't have a care in the world. Adama walked over to her, her heart pounding in her chest. "Ijoma," she said softly, holding out the phone. You forgot this at home." Ijoma looked up at her, a look of surprise flashing across her face before it was quickly replaced with annoyance. "Oh," she said, taking the phone from Adama's hand without so much as a thank you. "I didn't even realize I left it behind." Adama nodded, trying to keep her emotions in check. "Auntie sent me to bring it to you. I'm supposed to go back home now." Ijoma waved her off dismissively. "Well, you have done your job. You can leave now." The other girls around Ijoma snickered, whispering among themselves. Adama could feel their eyes on her, and she knew they were judging her, but she didn't let it show. Instead, she turned to leave, eager to escape the uncomfortable situation. But just as she was about to walk away, she heard someone clear their throat behind her. She turned around and saw Uzo standing at the entrance, watching her with a thoughtful expression. "Adama," he called out, his voice cutting through the whispers of the other girls. "Would you like to stay for a while and have a drink before you leave?" Adama blinked in surprise. "Stay?" She hadn't expected that. She glanced at Ijoma, who was now staring at Uzo with wide eyes, clearly surprised that he was addressing Adama. I'm not sure." Adama stammered, caught off guard. "I'm supposed to go back." Uzo smiled at her, his eyes kind. "It won't take long. Just a quick drink before you go. Consider it a small reward for making the trip all the way here." Adama hesitated, feeling torn. She didn't want to disobey Aunty Nkechi, but at the same time, she couldn't deny the kindness that was being offered to her. And for once, she wanted to feel like she belonged, even if it was just for a brief moment. "I guess a quick drink wouldn't hurt," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Uzo nodded, pleased with her answers. "Great, follow me then." As Adama followed Uzo out of the room, she could feel the eyes of the other girls on her. They were probably wondering why she was being treated so kindly when she clearly didn't belong. But for the first time, Adama didn't care. She was just grateful for this small moment of kindness in a world that had often been so harsh. Adama had never tasted anything as refreshing as the cool drink the palace chef offered her. It was sweet, with a hint of tanginess that lingered on her lip. She took slow sips, feeling the chill travel down her throat, cooling the heat that had built up from her long walk to the palace. She was grateful for the kindness of the chef, unaware that she was in fact sharing a moment with Prince Uzo in disguise. They sat in the kitchen, a space bustling with sounds of clanging pots and the sizzle of food being prepared. The chef, Prince Uzo, kept her company, asking her questions about her life in the village. Adama, shy at first, found herself opening up. She talked about her life with Aunty Nkechi, the chores that never seemed to end, and her dreams of something better, though she didn't dare voice those dreams aloud. The chef listened attentively, his eyes softening with each word. He could see the strength in her, the quiet resilience that she carried like a shield. When she finished her drink, Adama stood up, ready to leave and return to her duties at once. "I must go now," she said, placing the empty cup on the table. "Thank you for the drink." "You are welcome," the chef said with a smile, his eyes twinkling with a kindness that put Adama at ease. "Take care on your way home." Adama nodded and made her way to the palace gate, her heart a little lighter after the brief respite. As she reached the gate, the palace guard stepped aside to let her through. Just as she was about to step out, she heard a voice call down from above. "Who is that girl?" the voice asked. Adama looked up, startled to see the king standing on a balcony, his regal figure framed by the ornate carvings of the palace. The guard, who had already started to close the gate, quickly turned to the king and bowed. "Your Majesty, she's not part of the competition," the guard explained. "She only came to return her cousin's phone. She was just leaving." The king frowned slightly, his eyes narrowing as he observed Adama more closely. "She's not part of the competition, you say?" "Yes, Your Majesty," the guard replied. "She only came to do a small errand." The king was silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on Adama. Then, to everyone's surprise, he spoke with a commanding tone. "Young girl, come here." Adama hesitated, her heart pounding in her chest. She glanced at the guard, who nodded for her to approach the king. Gathering her courage, Adama walked slowly back into the palace grounds and looked up at the king. "What is your name?" the king asked, his voice stern but not unkind. "Adama, Your Majesty," she replied, bowing her head in respect. "Adama," the king repeated. "Why are you not part of the competition?" Adama swallowed, unsure of how to answer. "My auntie said I could not participate, Your Majesty." The king raised an eyebrow, clearly displeased with the response. "Nonsense! Every maiden in this village has the right to participate. You will join the competition and you will attend the first meeting with the other maidens, where I will introduce the judges, the prince and the palace staffs." Adama's eyes widened in shock. "But Your Majesty, I cannot," the king cut her off with a wave of his hand. "You will join, and that is final. Now go and prepare yourself." Before Adama could protest further, the king turned and disappeared back into the palace, leaving her standing there stunned. The guard, sensing her hesitation, gently guided her towards the main courtyard where the other maidens were gathering. As Adama entered the courtyard, she felt all eyes on her. The other maidens, dressed in their finest attire, stared at her with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. Adama felt out of place, her simple clothes and unkempt hair making her stand out among the others. She felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment, but she kept her head down and followed the guard to her place in the meeting. The courtyard was filled with rows of chairs, all facing a raised platform where the king would address them. Adama found an empty seat at the back and sat down, trying to make herself as small as possible. She could hear the whispers around her, the murmurs of the other maidens as they gossiped about the sudden appearance of this strange girl. "Who is she?" one of them whispered. "Why is she here?" another asked, her voice dripping with disdain. "She looks like she doesn't belong," someone else muttered. Adama bit her lip, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill. She didn't want to be here, didn't want to be the center of attention. All she had wanted was to return Ijoma's phone and go back home. But now, she was thrust into a world she didn't understand, surrounded by girls who looked at her as if she were something unpleasant. Suddenly, the murmur of voices quieted as the king entered the courtyard, followed by a group of men and women dressed in fine robes. These were the judges and palace staff who would oversee the competition. Behind them, the prince's friend Obina walked in posing as the prince, his head held high with a regal air. Adama didn't recognize him, of course, and assumed he was the prince everyone was talking about. The king stood on the platform and looked over the gathered maidens. "Welcome, all of you, to this important event," he began, his voice carrying across the courtyard. You have all been chosen to participate in a competition that will determine who will become the future queen of this kingdom. The maidens sat up straighter at these words, their excitement palpable. The king introduced the judges one by one, each of them bowing slightly as their names were called. They were important figures in the kingdom, wise, fair, and well respected. Next, the king introduced the palace staff who would assist the maidens during their stay, including the cooks, maids, and tutors who would help them prepare for the various tasks ahead. When it was time to introduce the prince, Obina stepped forward, smiling warmly at the maidens. I look forward to getting to know each of you better, he said, his voice smooth and confident. May the best among you win. Adama listened, her heart heavy with doubt. She didn't belong here, among these beautiful and accomplished girls. She was just a poor orphan, with nothing to offer. When the introductions were over, the king asked each maiden to stand and introduce herself to the group. One by one, the girls stood up, each more elegant and composed than the last. They spoke with confidence, their voices clear and strong as they announced their names and the villages they came from. When it was Ijoma's turn, she stood with a proud smile on her face. I am Ijoma, daughter of Nkechi from this great village of Umunze, she said, her voice filled with pride. I am honored to be here and will do my best to bring glory to my family. When Adama's turn came, she hesitated, her hands trembling slightly. She could feel the weight of Ijoma's glare from across the courtyard, the sharpness of her cousin's gaze cutting through her. Taking a deep breath, Adama stood up, her voice barely above a whisper. My name is Adama. I'm from the village of Achala, but I live with my auntie here in Umunze, she said, keeping her eyes on the ground. I am grateful for this opportunity. The silence that followed her introduction was deafening. Adama quickly sat down, feeling the heat of embarrassment flood her cheeks. She knew she had not made a good impression, and she could almost feel the other girl's eyes boring into her with judgment. After the meeting, the king dismissed the maidens, instructing them to prepare for the days ahead. As the group dispersed, Adama tried to slip away unnoticed, but Ijoma was quick to intercept her. What are you doing here? Ijoma hissed, her eyes flashing with anger. You don't belong in this competition. You are not worthy to be here. Adama looked down, not daring to meet her cousin's furious gaze. I didn't ask to be here, she murmured. The king told me I had to join. Ijoma's face twisted with rage. You should have refused. This is my chance, not yours. You will only embarrass our family. Adama said nothing, knowing that anything she said would only make things worse. She kept her head down and walked away, her heart heavy with the weight of Ijoma's words. Later, Adama found the courage to approach the king and ask for permission to return home to collect her clothes. The king granted her request with a nod. But do not take too long, he warned. The competition will soon begin. Adama promised to be quick and hurried back to Aunt Nkechi's house. When she arrived, her aunt was waiting for her, a scowl on her face. Where have you been? Aunt Nkechi demanded, her voice sharp. Do you know how much work there is to be done? I'm sorry, Auntie, Adama said quietly, keeping her head down. She didn't dare tell her auntie about the king's command. Instead, she quickly gathered a few of her belongings, careful not to draw any more attention to herself. She didn't want to give Aunt Nkechi any reason to suspect that something had changed. that her life might take a different turn after today. She stuffed her clothes into a small bag, her heart pounding in her chest, knowing she would have to sneak back to the palace without raising suspicions. As she turned to leave the room, Auntie Kechi's sharp voice rang out again. You think you can disappear all day and come back without a word of explanation? Adama froze, clutching the bag tightly. She knew she had to be careful with her words. I'm sorry, Auntie. I lost track of time while I was running the errand for Ijoma. Useless girl! Auntie Nkechi spat, her face contorted with anger. You are just as worthless as your late parent. Wandering around instead of doing the work that needs to be done. Do you think you can waste my time and food while you lazy about? Adama swallowed hard, feeling the sting of her aunt's words like a slap to the face. I'm sorry, Auntie. I will make up for the work, I promise. Auntie Nkechi scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. Get out of my sight before I lose my temper completely. And don't you dare show your face around here if you are not going to be useful. Adama nodded quickly, backing out of the room. She didn't dare to breathe until she was outside and far enough from the house. Her heart raced as she hurried down the path leading back to the palace, her bag clutched tightly in her hands. She didn't dare to look back, afraid that Auntie Nkechi might suddenly appear and drag her back into that life of endless chores and insults. When she reached the palace, the sun had begun to set, casting long shadows over the courtyard. Adama slipped inside quietly, hoping to go unnoticed. But as she rounded a corner, she came face to face with Ijoma, who had been pacing near the entrance waiting for her. What are you doing back here? Ijoma demanded, her eyes narrowing in suspicion. You are supposed to be home, not sneaking around the palace like a thief. Adama tried to steady her nerves, keeping her voice calm. I came back to get something I forgot. Liar! Ijoma snapped, her voice filled with venom. You were planning to stay here, weren't you? Don't think I don't know what you are up to, Adama. You think you can just walk into this competition and take what's rightfully mine? Adama kept her eyes on the ground, not daring to meet Ijoma's furious gaze. I'm not trying to take anything from you, Ijoma. I don't even want to be here. Then why are you here? Ijoma's voice rose with each word. Why didn't you go home like you were supposed to? Are you trying to make a fool of me? Adama opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, Ijoma's anger boiled over. Get out of my sight. Go crawl back to whatever hole you came from, and don't you dare think you can compete with me. Adama stayed silent, her heart aching from the harsh words. She knew Ijoma's anger was fueled by fear that she might lose the competition, fear that Adama might somehow outshine her. But knowing this didn't make the words hurt any less. Adama turned away from Ijoma, walking quickly towards the room that had been assigned to her. As soon as she entered, she shut the door behind her and leaned against it, taking deep breaths to calm herself. The room was small but comfortable, a far cry from the cramped space she was used to at Auntie Nkechi's house. There was a bed with clean sheets, a small table, and a basin of water for washing. Adama set her bag down on the bed and sat beside it, letting out a long weary sigh. She had never imagined herself in a place like this, surrounded by luxury, but with every effort came the bitter reminder that she was still out of place, still unwanted by those around her. Adama felt a tear slip down her cheek, quickly brushing it away. She didn't want to cry. She had to be strong.
She was just about to lie down when there was a knock on the door. Adama tensed, fearing it might be Ijoma again. But when she opened the door, she was surprised to see the palace chef, the real Prince Uzo, standing there with a warm smile on his face. "I thought I might find you here," he said, his voice gentle. Adama managed a small smile, grateful for the friendly face. "I didn't think I would see you again so soon." The chef chuckled, stepping into the room. "Well, it seems you have had quite the day. I heard about what happened with the king." Adama nodded, her smile fading. "I didn't mean to cause any trouble. I just wanted to return Ijoma's phone and go back home." The chef, Prince Uzo, shook his head. "You are not causing any trouble, Adama. The king saw something in you, something that makes you just as worthy as any of the other maidens to be here." "But I don't belong here," Adama said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not like the other girls. I don't have fancy clothes or rich parents or anything." Prince Uzo's eyes softened and he took a seat beside her on the bed. "You have something far more valuable than all of that. You have a good heart, Adama, and a strength that comes from within. Those are things that can't be bought with money or shown off with pretty dresses." Adama looked at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. For the first time since the day began, she felt a small glimmer of hope. "Do you really think so?" "I do," Prince Uzo said, his smile reassuring. "And you are not alone here. I'll be around if you need a friend. Trust me, you are going to do just fine." Adama felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. She nodded, feeling a little more confident. "Thank you for everything." The chef, Prince Uzo, stood up, giving her a final smile. "Rest well tonight, Adama. Tomorrow is a new day, and I have a feeling it's going to be an interesting one." With that, he left the room, leaving Adama alone with her thoughts. She lay down on the bed, feeling the weight of the day slowly lift from her shoulders. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to hope, to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. As she drifted off to sleep, Adama held onto the kind words of the chef, not knowing that she had just spoken with the prince, who would soon change her life in ways she could never have imagined. The palace courtyard buzzed with activity as the sun peeked over the horizon, bathing Umunze village in a warm golden light. Today was the day the competition would begin in earnest, with the first test that would challenge the maidens in ways they had never been challenged before. The maidens had been given time to prepare, but even with all the practice and study, there was a palpable tension in the air. The first test was divided into 3 parts, each one more demanding than the last. First, there would be a cultural dance, where the maidens would have to showcase their knowledge of traditional dances. This would be followed by a series of questions and answers about the heritage of Umunze, the neighboring village with a rich and ancient history. Finally, the third part would be a general quiz, testing the maidens on their knowledge, not just of their village, but of the wider world. Adama stood on the edge of the courtyard, her heart pounding in her chest. She had barely slept the night before, her mind racing with thoughts of the test. She knew she wasn't as prepared as the other maidens. They had grown up learning these dances and stories, while she had been busy with chores and surviving the harsh life at Auntie Nkechi's house. But she couldn't let that stop her. She had to try, not just for herself, but for the memory of her parent. As the maidens gathered, some of them began to argue. Nneka, one of the most confident and outspoken maidens, was holding up a brightly colored wrapper, her face flushed with anger. "Who took my wrapper?" she demanded, her voice sharp. "I left it in my room last night and now it's gone." Amara, another maiden, rolled her eyes and crossed her arms. "Maybe you misplaced it," she said dismissively. "It's not like anyone here would want to steal your wrapper. We all have our own." Nneka stepped closer to Amara, her voice low and threatening. "Are you calling me a liar? I know I left it there, and now it's gone. Someone took it, and I won't rest until I find out who." The argument quickly escalated as other maidens joined in, accusing each other of copying styles or taking things that didn't belong to them. The tension was thick, and it seemed like a fight could break out at any moment. Adama watched from the sidelines, feeling out of place among the quarreling maidens. She didn't have a fancy wrapper or jewelry to worry about. She only had the simple clothes she had brought from Auntie Nkechi's house. But as she looked at the other maidens, she felt a pang of worry. She needed something to wear for the dance, something that would make her look like she belonged. As the argument continued, Adama noticed the palace chef, the kind man who had helped her the day before, standing nearby watching the commotion with a concerned expression. She hesitated for a moment, then gathered her courage and approached him. "Excuse me," she said quietly, catching his attention. I don't have anything to wear for the test. Could you help, please?" The chef smiled warmly at her. "Of course, Adama," he said kindly. "Come with me." He led her to a small room in a quiet corner of the palace, where various garments and accessories were kept. "These are some of the clothes left by previous palace visitors," he explained. "You are welcome to choose whatever you need." Adama looked around the room, her eyes wide with wonder. There were so many beautiful things: colorful wrappers, beaded necklaces, and delicate anklets. But she didn't feel right taking something too grand. So she chose a simple yet elegant wrapper with a pattern of delicate flowers. It reminded her of her mother and the story she used to tell. "Thank you," Adama said, her voice full of gratitude. "This is perfect." The chef nodded, his smile never fading. "Remember, Adama, it's not just about what you wear. It's about how you carry yourself. Confidence is the key." Adama nodded, feeling a little more reassured. She left the room with the wrapper in hand, determined to do her best. As she wrapped the clothes around her waist and adjusted it carefully, memories of her mother flooded her mind. She remembered the evenings when her mother would teach her traditional dance steps, guiding her feet with gentle patience. "Always move with the rhythm of your heart, Adama," her mother had said. "The dance is not about the steps, it's about telling our story. Nso, sacred, is our culture, and it lives in every movement you make." Adama closed her eyes, trying to recall the steps her mother had taught her. She could see her mother's graceful movement in her mind, and she began to practice, moving slowly at first, then gradually picking up the pace. The rhythm of the dance flowed through her, and with each step, she felt a little more confident. However, her practice was interrupted by a loud knock on the door. When she opened it, she found Ijoma standing there, her expression full of frustration. "Adama," Ijoma snapped. "Why are you wasting time here? The test is about to start, and you're not even ready. You are going to embarrass us if you don't hurry up." Adama flinched at her cousin's harsh words, but kept her voice calm. "I'm doing my best, Ijoma. I'll be ready in time." Ijoma scoffed. "Your best isn't good enough, Adama. This competition is for people who actually have a chance, not for someone like you." Without waiting for a response, Ijoma turned and stomped off, leaving Adama alone once again. Adama felt a lump in her throat, but she pushed back the tears. She couldn't let Ijoma's words get to her. She had to focus on the test. The courtyard was filled with anticipation as the maidens gathered for the first part of the test. They had all changed into their finest wrappers and adorned themselves with jewelry, their faces painted with intricate designs. Adama felt out of place among them, but she reminded herself of the chef's words, confidence. The first part of the test was the cultural dance. The maidens would each have a chance to showcase their knowledge of traditional dance, moving to the beat of the drums played by the palace musicians. The king and the judges watched from their seats, their expressions serious as they prepared to evaluate the performances. Adama watched as the other maidens took their turns. Some were graceful and skilled, their movements fluid and precise. Others struggled, their steps uncertain as they tried to remember the dance routines they had practiced. Adama could see the tension in their faces, the pressure to perform well weighing heavily on her. When it was Ijeoma's turn, she stepped forward confidently, but as the drums began to play, it was clear that something was wrong. Ijeoma hesitated, her movements stiff and awkward. She tried to remember the steps, but her frustration was evident as she faltered, her dance lacking the grace she had hoped for. Adama watched with a mixture of sympathy and relief. It was clear that Ijeoma was struggling, just as she was. But unlike Ijeoma, Adama had something more to rely on, her mother's teachings. When her turn came, Adama took a deep breath and stepped forward. As the drums began to play, Adama closed her eyes and let the rhythm guide her. She moved with the music, her steps light and fluid, just as her mother had taught her. The memories of those lessons filled her with a sense of peace, and she danced as if her mother were right there beside her. The courtyard felt silent as Adama danced, her movements telling the story of her village's heritage. She could feel the eyes of the judges on her, but she didn't let it distract her. She focused on the dance, on the story she was telling with each step. When the dance was over, she stood still for a moment, catching her breath before bowing respectfully to the judges. The king nodded approvingly, and Adama could see a flicker of surprise in his eyes. She had done well, better than she had expected. She returned to her place, feeling a sense of accomplishment that she hadn't felt in a long time. The second part of the test was a quiz about the heritage of Umunze village. The judges asked questions about the customs, traditions, and history of Umunze. The questions were difficult, testing the maidens' knowledge of everything from ancient ceremonies to significant historical events. Adama listened carefully as the questions were asked. She was surprised to find that she knew the answers to some of them, thanks to the story her mother told her. When her turn came to answer, she spoke confidently, her voice steady as she recalled the details she had learned. The judges seemed impressed, nodding as she gave the correct answers. Ijeoma, on the other hand, struggled. She hadn't paid much attention to the lessons she had been given about Umunze's history, and it showed. When the judges asked her a question, she hesitated, unable to come up with an answer. The other maidens whispered among themselves, and Ijeoma's face grew red with embarrassment. The final part of the test was a general quiz that tested the maidens' knowledge of the world beyond their village. The questions ranged from geography to current events, covering everything from the names of distant rivers to the traditions of faraway lands. The maidens were given a few moments to think before answering, but the pressure was intense. The judges watched closely, their expressions stern as they took notes on each other's performance. Adama felt her nerves returning as the quiz began. She had never been far from Achala village, and her knowledge of the wider world was limited, but she reminded herself of the chef's words, confidence is the key. She answered the questions as best as she could, drawing on what little she had learned from the few books she had managed to read and the stories her mother had told her when she was a little girl. When it was Ijeoma's turn, she struggled once again. The questions were challenging, and it was clear that Ijoma hadn't prepared for this part of the test. She stumbled over her answers, her frustration growing with each incorrect response. The other maidens whispered among themselves. As the quiz came to an end, the judges finished their notes and exchanged glances. The maidens were given a moment to relax before dinner was served in the palace dining hall. The first test had been exhausting, and everyone was eager for a chance to rest and eat. The dining hall was grand, with long tables covered in beautiful linens and adorned with fresh flowers. The aroma of delicious food filled the air, and the maidens took their seats, chatting quietly among themselves. Adama felt a little out of place in the opulent surroundings, but she reminded herself to stay calm and focused. The palace chef, still in his disguise as Uzo, the humble cook, entered the hall with a team of kitchen staff, carrying trays of steaming dishes. There were bowls of jollof rice, plates of roasted yam with spicy palm oil sauce, and platters of grilled fish seasoned with herbs. The sight of the food made Adama's stomach growl, and she realized just how hungry she was. As the food was served, the maidens began to eat, their earlier tensions forgotten. But the peace didn't last long. One of the maidens, Chika, who had been boastful throughout the competition, suddenly pushed her plate away with a scoff. "What is this?" Chika demanded, her voice loud and rude. "This food is tasteless. How dare you serve us something so bland? Do you think we are commoners?" The dining hall fell silent, and all eyes turned to Chika. She glared at the palace chef, who stood nearby with a calm expression. Adama's heart sank as she watched the scene unfold. She knew that speaking to a palace staff member in such a disrespectful manner was unacceptable, and she couldn't believe Chika had been so bold. The chef, still maintaining his composure, stepped forward. "I apologize if the meal is not to your liking," he said politely, though there was a firmness in his voice. "We prepared the dishes with the finest ingredients and the utmost care." Chika sneered, clearly unimpressed. "Care? This food tastes like it was made for pigs. You should be ashamed of yourself for serving this to us." Adama felt a surge of anger on behalf of the chef. She wanted to speak up to defend the man who had been so kind to her, but she knew it wasn't her place. She could only watch as the situation grew more intense. The other maidens shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some of them exchanging uneasy glances. They knew that Chika had crossed a line, but no one dared to say anything. The chef, however, remained calm, his expression unreadable. "I assure you, Miss Chika, that we strive to serve the best," he said, his voice steady. "If there is anything specific you would like, I will do my best to accommodate your request." Chika rolled her eyes and waved her hand dismissively. "Just get out of my sight," she snapped. "You are nothing but a lowly cook." The chef nodded, his face betraying no emotion as he stepped back. Adama noticed, however, that the king and the judges had been observing the entire exchange. They were taking notes, their expressions thoughtful as they recorded everything that had happened during the dinner. It was clear that the judges were not just evaluating the maidens on their performances in the test, but also on their behavior and character. As the dinner continued, the atmosphere in the dining became more subdued. The maidens ate in silence, aware that every action was being watched and noted. Adama could feel the weight of the competition pressing down on her, but she also felt a sense of resolve. She knew that the judges were looking for more than just skill and knowledge. They were looking for someone with a kind heart and a strong spirit. When the meal was over, the maidens were dismissed to their rooms for the night. As they left the dining hall, Adama noticed the chef watching her. He gave her a small encouraging smile, and she felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. She knew that he believed in her, and that gave her the strength to keep going. The day had been long and exhausting, but Adama knew that the real challenges were still ahead. The result of the first test would be announced the next day, and she could only hope that her efforts had been enough to keep her in the competition. The next day dawned with a sense of unease hanging over the palace like a heavy mist. It was the day everyone had been waiting for, the day when the result of the first test would be announced. The tension in the air was palpable, and the palace buzzed with anticipation as the maidens tried to prepare themselves for whatever news the day would bring. From the early hours of the morning, whispers could be heard echoing through the corridors. The maidens were anxious, some more than others. They had spent the night replaying the events of the test in their minds, wondering if they had done enough to secure their place in the competition. Some clung to the hope that they had answered the questions well, while others feared the worst. Among the maidens, there were those who were confident in their performance. They strutted through the palace with an air of self-assurance, certain that they would receive high scores. They laughed and joked, sharing their belief that they were safe from elimination. Their confidence was a stark contrast to the fear that gripped others. In the corner of the palace, a small group of mischievous maidens huddled together, their voices low as they discussed a plan that could save them from elimination. One of them had taken the lead in their scheme. She had even gone as far as to approach one of the judges the night before. "Biko, please, if you save me from elimination, I will make it worth your while," she had whispered to him, her voice dripping with desperation. She promised him a night together if he ensured she wouldn't be sent home. The judge, startled by her boldness, had quickly walked away, leaving Nneka to wonder if her plan would work. Elsewhere in the palace, some maidens were filled with sadness and regret. They had not performed well in the test and were unsure of what to expect. They gathered in small groups, their faces clouded with worry. Their hearts pounded in their chests as they tried to imagine what the results would hold. These girls avoided the confident maidens, fearing that their own anxiety would only grow if they had more talk of success. Amid all the tension, Adama found herself in a different place emotionally. She wasn't part of any of the groups, the confident, the anxious, or the mischievous. All she could think about was her life before the competition. The thought of returning to Auntie Nkechi's house, where she had known nothing but hardship and suffering, filled her with dread. Adama didn't care much about winning or losing. She just didn't want to go back to that life. "Chukwu, please, let me stay," she whispered to herself as she walked through the palace, her mind heavy with worry. As the hours passed, the palace chef Uzo moved quietly through the palace, his sharp eyes observing everything. He had noticed how some of the maidens treated each other and how they behaved when they thought no one was watching. Uzo had always believed that a person's true nature was revealed in moments of stress, and today was no exception. Prince Obinna too had been watching closely. He had a unique vantage point, allowing himself to see beyond the maidens' performances and observe their true characters. He saw how they interacted with each other and with the palace staff. King Obidike was also keeping a close eye on the competition. Though he was the king, he was just as interested in the maidens' behavior as in their test scores. He believed that a future queen should possess not only intelligence, but also kindness and humility. Finally, the moment everyone had been waiting for arrived. The maidens were summoned to the grand hall, where the result of the first test would be announced. As they gathered, the room fell silent. The air was thick with anticipation, and the maidens' hearts raced in their chest. The head judge, a tall man with a serious expression, stood at the front of the room, holding a scroll in his hand. The scroll contained the scores and the names of those who would move on to the next round. The judge's voice echoed through the hall as he began to speak. The results of the first test are now ready to be announced. Each of you did your best, but only some will move forward. I will now read the scores and announce who will be leaving the competition. The maidens held their breath as the judge began to call out names. He started with those who had received the highest scores. Relief washed over some as their names were called. Their scores high enough to keep them in the competition. Their faces lit up with joy, and they exchanged smiles and congratulatory whispers. Others, however, remained silent, their names still unspoken. Fear gnawed at them as the list of names dwindled. Adama stood quietly, her hands clasped tightly together. Her heart pounded in her chest as she waited for the judge to finish reading the names. She prayed silently, hoping that her name would be called before it was too late. When the judge reached the end of the list, he paused, letting the suspense build. The maiden who will be leaving the competition is Chika, he finally announced, his voice firm. A murmur spread through the room as the maidens turned to look at Chika. The girl's face crumbled in shock and disbelief. She had not only struggled with the questions, but had also been rude to the palace staff and chefs. Her behavior had sealed her fate. "No, please," Chika cried, stepping forward, but the judge shook his head. "The decision is final. You must leave the palace at once." With a heavy heart, Chika walked out of the hall, her shoulders slumped in defeat. The remaining maidens watched her go. Their relief mingled with fear. They had been spared this time, but they knew the competition would only get tougher. Once Chika left, the judge cleared his throat and addressed the remaining maidens. The next test would take place in 2 days. It would be a cooking test. Each of you will prepare your best meal, which should be served to the king, the prince, and the judges. The maiden who prepares the most delicious dish will have the opportunity to speak with the prince directly. Excited, murmurs spread through the room. The idea of a cooking test thrilled many of the maidens. They eagerly anticipated the chance to showcase their culinary skills and the possibility of speaking to the prince personally. Each girl had her own reasons for wanting this opportunity. Some were driven by ambition, while others hoped to win the prince's heart. Adama felt a flicker of hope. Cooking was something she was familiar with. Thanks to her mother's teachings, the thought of preparing a meal that could impress the king and prince filled her with determination. She was excited about the cooking test, even though she knew the competition would be fierce. Her mother's lessons in the kitchen were her strength, and she hoped they would give her an advantage. As the maidens left the grand hall, they went to their rooms to prepare for the next test. Some girls immediately called family members and friends, seeking advice on what dish to prepare. They wanted to ensure their recipe would stand out. Ijoma in particular was worried about her cooking skills. She wasn't as experienced as others, and she sought help from anyone who could offer it. Meanwhile, some maidens were scheming. They whispered in dark corners about ways to sabotage their rivals. A few even bribed the palace gatekeeper to let them sneak out to visit herbalists. They hoped to obtain charms that would make their dishes irresistible to the king and prince. They were determined to win at any cost, even if it meant using underhanded tactics. Adama, on the other hand, was focused on her preparations. Cooking was second nature to her, thanks to her mother's careful instruction. She spent the evening planning her dish, a rice, savory ofe nsala, white soup with fresh catfish and pounded yam, a traditional meal that was both hearty and comforting. She remembered the way her mother used to make it, the way she would carefully blend the ingredients, and the patience it took to get the flavors just right. Adama's mind was set on recreating that same magic in her dish. The next 2 days passed in a blur of activity. The palace was alive with the sounds of the maidens practicing their cooking, gathering ingredients, and discussing their plans. Some of the girls were frantic, especially those who weren't confident in their culinary skills. Ijoma was among them, pacing back and forth in her room, chewing her lip nervously. She had begged a friend to teach her how to cook a simple dish, but even then, she wasn't sure she could pull it off. The day of the cooking test finally arrived. The maidens were up early, each of them trying to calm their nerves as they prepared to enter the palace kitchens. The large, spacious kitchen was bustling with activity as the girls gathered around their designated cooking stations. Each station had the maiden's name marked clearly on it, along with the pots and utensils they would use. Adama found her station and took a deep breath. She was ready. She had spent the last 2 days going over every detail in her mind, remembering her mother's words and the care she put into her cooking. "This is for you, Nne," she thought, her heart swelling with determination. As the girls began to cook, the kitchen filled with the mouth-watering aromas of various dishes being prepared. Some maidens moved quickly, trying to finish as fast as possible, while others took their time, ensuring every step was perfect. The tension in the kitchen was thick, and the maidens glanced at each other nervously as they worked, each one hoping to outdo the others. Adama was fully immersed in her task, her hands moving skillfully as she prepared her dish. She ground the fresh uziza seeds and crayfish, added them carefully to the pot, and watched as the broth simmered to perfection. She could almost see her mother standing beside her, guiding her with every step. The memory filled her with warmth, and she knew she was doing everything just right. But not everyone was so focused. As Adama's dish neared completion, Ijoma, who was cooking at the station next to hers, kept casting furtive glances at Adama's pot. Ijoma's own dish was not coming together as she had hoped, and panic was starting to set in. Her mind raced as she tried to think of a way to save herself from failure, and then a devious idea crossed her mind. When Adama wasn't looking, Ijoma quickly switched their pots, replacing Adama's dish with her own. She also swapped the name tags on their stations, hoping that Adama would be the one to present the poorly made dish to the king and the prince. A sly smile curled on Ijoma's lips as she hurriedly returned to her station, satisfied with her plan. Unknown to her, however, the palace chef Uzo had witnessed everything, hidden in the shadows. He had been keeping an eye on the maidens, and he saw Ijoma's sneaky move. Without hesitation, Uzo waited for the right moment, and when the maidens were called to present their dishes in the dining hall, he quietly switched the pots back to their original places, making sure that Adama's dish would be the one presented under her name. The maidens gathered in the palace dining room, their hearts pounding with anxiety as they prepared to serve their dishes to the king, the prince, and the judges. The grand dining table was set with fine silverware,
and the aroma of the various dishes filled the air, making everyone's mouth water. One by one, the maidens presented their dishes to the king, who sat at the head of the table, and the prince, who was seated next to him. The judges tasted each dish, taking their time to evaluate the flavors and presentation. The room was silent, the tension almost unbearable, as the maidens waited for the verdict. When it was finally Adama's turn, she stepped forward, her heart in her throat. She placed her pot of ofen salad and pounded yam on the table, her hands trembling as she removed the lid to reveal the steamy, fragrant soup. The king leaned forward, inhaling the rich aroma with a pleased expression. Prince Obinna watched closely, his curiosity piqued. The king took a spoonful of the soup, tasting it slowly, while the judges sampled the pounded yam and the tender piece of fish. As they ate, a look of delight spread across their faces. The king nodded approvingly, and the prince smiled, clearly impressed. "This is delicious," the king declared, his voice warm with satisfaction. "Whoever made this dish has true talent." Adama's heart soared at the king's praise. She had done it. She had impressed the king and the prince with her cooking. She couldn't help but smile, her eyes shining with happiness. After all the dishes had been tasted, the judges conferred quietly among themselves before turning back to the maidens. The head judge cleared his throat, signaling that the results were about to be announced. The room fell silent as everyone waited with bated breath. The winner of the cooking test, whose dish was the most flavorful and well prepared, is Adama, the judge announced, his voice ringing through the hall. A gasp of surprise rippled through the room, followed by murmurs of admiration. Adama could hardly believe her ears. She had won. The joy she felt was overwhelming, and she could hardly keep the smile from her face. The other maidens looked at her with a mixture of envy and respect, while Ijoma's face twisted in disbelief and anger. She couldn't understand how Adama had managed to win after she had switched their dishes. As a reward for her victory, Adama was given the opportunity to speak directly to Prince Obinna. She stepped forward, her heart fluttering as she approached the prince. He smiled warmly at her, his eyes filled with genuine admiration. "Your cooking is extraordinary, Adama," he said, his voice gentle. "You must be very proud of yourself." "Thank you, my prince," Adama replied, her voice soft but steady. She was filled with gratitude and a sense of accomplishment that she had never felt before. After the announcement, the maidens who had performed poorly in the cooking were eliminated. Some of them accepted their fate with grace, while others left the palace bitter and disappointed. A few maidens even chose to withdraw from the competition, realizing that they could not handle the pressure. The competition was proving to be more challenging than they had anticipated, and not everyone was cut out for it. As the day drew to a close, the remaining maidens retired to their rooms, each one reflecting on the day's event. Some were happy, others were sad, and a few were plotting their next move. Ijoma in particular was sitting with anger. Her plan had failed miserably, and she couldn't understand how Adama's dish had been chosen over hers. Her hatred for Adama deepened, and she vowed to find another way to bring her down. Meanwhile, Adama was heading back to her room when she noticed the palace chef Uzo waiting for her in the corridor. He had a knowing smile on his face, and as she approached, he gestured for her to stop. "Adama," he said, his voice low but kind, "I have something to tell you." Adama looked at him curiously, her brow furrowed with confusion. "What is it, Chef Uzo?" she asked. Uzo glanced around to make sure no one was listening, then leaned in closer. "I saw what your cousin Ijoma did in the kitchen," he began. She switched your dish with hers, hoping to ruin your chance. But don't worry, I switched them back before anyone noticed. Adama's eyes widened with shock and disbelief. She did that? She whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and sadness. Uzo nodded, his expression serious. Yes, she did. But I wasn't about to let her get away with it. You deserve the recognition we received today, Adama. Your cooking was the best, and that's why you won. Tears welled up in Adama's eyes as she realized the extent of Ijoma's treachery. But more than that, she was filled with gratitude for Uzo's kindness and honesty. Thank you, Chef Uzo, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Thank you for helping me. Uzo smiled gently at her. You're welcome, Adama. Just keep being yourself and don't let anyone bring you down. You are stronger than you know. Adama returned to her room, her mind swelling with thoughts of the day's event. She was both elated and troubled. The joy of winning the cooking test and receiving praise from the king and the prince was tempered by the knowledge of Ijoma's betrayal. As she lay on her bed, staring at the ceiling, Adama replayed the scene in the kitchen over and over in her mind. The image of Ijoma switching their dishes filled her with a deep sadness, but she was determined not to let it break her spirit. Despite the hurt, Adama found comfort in the kindness of Chef Uzo. His support and encouragement meant more to her than words could explain. She realized that there were people in the palace who believed in her, and that gave her the strength to face whatever lay ahead. As the night wore on, Adama finally drifted off to sleep, her dreams a mixture of memories and hopes for the future. She dreamed of her mother, of the village of Achala, and of a life where she was free from the burdens of her past. In her dream, she was standing on a hill, looking out over the village, and she could hear the distant sounds of drums and singing, sounds of celebrating and joy. It was a vision of a future where she had overcome all the challenges before her, where she was strong, happy, and at peace. When morning came, Adama woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. The next test was looming, and she knew she had to be ready. She pushed thoughts of Ijoma's betrayal to the back of her mind and focused on what was to come. Adama knew that the road ahead would not be easy, but she was determined to face it with courage and determination. As she prepared for the day, she couldn't help but think of her mother's words, the advice she had given her so many times. Those words echoed in her heart, guiding her as she dressed and headed to the palace courtyard, where the next challenge awaited. The other maidens were already gathered, their faces a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. Adama joined them, her posture straight and her expression calm. She knew that the eyes of the palace were on them, and she wanted to make her mother proud. As the day's event unfolded, Adama kept her focus on the task at hand. The challenges were growing more difficult, and the competition was fierce, but she was determined to give her best. She knew that she could not afford to let her guard down, not even for a moment. But as the day drew to a close, and the maidens were once again gathered in the palace hall, Adama realized something important. She had come this far not just because of her skills or determination, but because of the support and kindness of those around her. From Chef Uzo's timely intervention to the memory of her mother's guidance, Adama understood that she was not alone in this journey. With the realization came a deep sense of peace. Adama knew that no matter what happened next, she would face it with grace and strength. And as she looked around at other maidens, some of whom were her rivals, she felt a sense of compassion for them as well. They were all on their own journeys, each facing their own challenges and fears. As the evening came to an end and the maidens were dismissed for the night, Adama walked back to her room with a light heart. She was ready for whatever the next day would bring. And as she closed her eyes to sleep, she whispered a prayer of gratitude for the strength to endure,
for the kindness of others, and for the love of her mother that continued to guide her. The night was quiet, and in the stillness, Adama dreamed once more. This time, her dreams were filled with the sounds of laughter and the warmth of the sun. She dreamed of a future where she had overcome all the obstacles in her path, where she stood tall and proud, surrounded by those who loved and believed in her. And so, with the rising sun, Adama prepared to continue her journey, her heart filled with hope and determination, ready to embrace whatever the future held. The day of the final test arrived with a sense of anticipation that hung thick in the air. The maidens were gathered in the grand hall of the palace, their heart pounding in their chest. They had faced many challenges in this competition, but this one was different. It was a test of intelligence and deep thinking, one that would reveal the sharpest mind among them. The chief judge stood before the maidens, holding a small, intricately carved box. Inside the box was a scroll, and on that scroll was written the ancient riddle that had been used in the village of Umunze for generations to test the wisdom of its people. As the judge opened the box and unrolled the scroll, the room fell silent. The maidens leaned forward, eager to hear the riddle that would determine their fate. This riddle, the judge began, his voice deep and steady, is one that has puzzled many before you. It is said that only those with a truly sharp mind and a deep understanding of the world can solve it. Listen carefully. He paused, letting the tension build, then continued. I speak without a mouth and hear without ears. I have no body, but I come alive with wind. What am I? The maidens exchanged puzzled glances, each one deep in thought. It was a difficult riddle, one that required them to think beyond the obvious. They knew the answer was not something they could simply guess. It required careful consideration and insight. Adama stood up quietly, her brow furrowed as she thought about the riddle. She knew this was the final test, the one that would determine who was truly worthy of becoming the prince's bride. She replayed the riddle in her mind, thinking about each word carefully. I speak without a mouth, hear without ears. Nobody but come alive with wind, she murmured to herself. The other maidens began to whisper among themselves, trying to come up with an answer. Some suggested it might be a spirit. Others thought it was an echo, but none of their answers felt right. Adama, however, continued, her mind turning over the possibilities. Suddenly, it hit her. The answer was so simple, yet so profound. An echo, she whispered, a smile spreading across her face. It's an echo. When the judge asked for their answers, the maidens hesitated, unsure of themselves, but Adama, with the confidence shining in her eyes, stepped forward. The answer is an echo, she said, her voice clear and sure. The judge smiled, a look of approval in his eyes. You are correct, Adama, he said. An echo is the answer. You have shown great wisdom and intelligence. The other maidens looked at Adama with a mix of admiration and envy. She had done it again, solved the riddle that had stumped them all. Ijoma in particular felt a surge of anger and frustration. How could Adama always come out on top? The next day, the maidens were called to the palace once more, this time to hear the final announcement. The grand hall was filled with people of Umunze village, all eager to see who would be chosen as the prince's bride. The king sat on his throne, with Prince Obina by his side. The real Prince Uzo stood quietly in the background, waiting for the moment to reveal the truth. The chief judge stepped forward, holding the scroll that contained the results of the competition. After many tests and challenges, the time has come to announce the winner, he began. The maiden, who has shown the most virtue, intelligence, and grace will be chosen as the bride of the prince. The tension in the room was palpable as the judge unrolled the scroll.
The winner of this competition, he announced, is Adama. The room erupted in applause and cheers as Adama stepped forward, her heart swelling with joy. She had done it. She had won. But as she stood before the king, she couldn't help but notice that Prince Obinna, the man she thought was the prince, was smiling at her with a twinkle in his eyes. Before she could say anything, the king rose from his throne, his expression serious but kind. "People of Umunze," he began, his voice carrying across the room, "there is something you all must know. The man you have seen as the prince throughout this competition is not the true prince." A gasp of shock rippled through the crowd, and the maidens exchanged confused and anxious glances. Adama felt her heart skip a beat. What was the king talking about? The king turned to Prince Obinna, who stepped forward with a smile. "The man you know as Prince," the king continued, "is actually Obinna, a close friend of the true prince. The real prince has been among you all along, disguised as someone else to observe your true nature." The crowd was silent, every eye fixed on the king. "The true prince of Umunze," the king said, "is none other than Prince Uzo, the man you have known as the palace chef." The room erupted in shocked murmurs, and several maidens gasped in disbelief. Some of them even fainted, overwhelmed by the revelation. They thought that they had treated the palace chef so poorly, not knowing he was the prince, filled them with regret and shame. Ijoma in particular felt her heart sink. She had been so cruel to Uzo, thinking he was just a lowly chef. Now she realized her mistake, and the regret was almost too much to bear. Prince Uzo stepped forward, his disguise removed, and smiled at the crowd. "I wanted to see the true characters of the maidens," he explained. "I wanted to know who would treat others with kindness, even when they thought no one important was watching. Adama was the only one who showed true virtue, treating everyone with respect and compassion. That is why I have chosen her to be my bride." The crowd erupted in applause once more, and Adama felt tears of joy welling up in her eyes. She couldn't believe it. She was going to be the queen of Umunze. Prince Uzo turned to his friend Obinna and clasped his hand. "Thank you, my friend, for playing the part so well," he said with a grateful smile. "You have been a true friend, and I couldn't have done this without you." Obinna smiled, clapping Uzo on the shoulder. "It was my honor, Uzo," he replied. "I'm glad we found the right person for you." The preparations for the wedding began, and the entire village of Umunze was abuzz with excitement. The palace was decorated with beautiful flowers and colorful fabrics, and the sounds of drums and flutes filled the air. It was a celebration like no other, with everyone eager to witness the union of Prince Uzo and Adama. Auntie Nkechi and Ijoma, however, were filled with regret. Nkechi couldn't believe how she had treated Adama all these years, never imagining that her niece would one day become a queen. Ijoma was equally devastated. She had spent so much time trying to bring Adama down, only to see her rise higher than she ever could have imagined. On the day of the wedding, Adama was dressed in the finest clothes the village had to offer. She wore a beautiful gele head tie of bright colors and a wrapper that shimmered in the sunlight. Her face was adorned with beads, and she looked every bit the queen she was about to become. As she walked down the aisle, her heart swelled with pride and happiness. She had come so far from the little girl who had been mistreated and overlooked. Now, she was about to marry the prince and become the queen of Umunze. It was a dream come true. The wedding ceremony was beautiful, filled with the rich traditions of the village. The elders blessed the couple, and the people sang and danced in celebration. When it was time for the vows, Prince Uzo took Adama's hand in his and looked into her eyes with a love that made her heart skip a beat. Adama, he said, his voice filled with emotion. From the moment I met you, I knew you were special. You have shown kindness, intelligence, and strength in everything you do. I am honored to have you as my wife and my queen. Adama smiled, tears of joy in her eyes. Uzo, she replied, her voice steady. I promise to stand by your side, to love you, and to be the best queen I can be. I am so grateful for this opportunity, and I will cherish it always. The ceremony ended with a grand feast, where the villagers and the royal family celebrated late into the night. Adama was the center of attention, and everyone admired her grace and beauty. Even Auntie Nkechi and Ijoma couldn't help but feel a twinge of pride, despite their regret. As the new queen of Umunze, Adama quickly took her duties. Her first successful act as queen was to establish a school for the children of the village, ensuring that every child, no matter their background, would have the opportunity to learn and grow. The villagers were amazed at her wisdom and generosity, and they knew that they were in good hands with Adama as their queen. Adama's school became a place where the children of Umuze learned not only how to read and write, but also about their rich heritage and traditions. She made sure that the teachers were kind and patient, just as she would have wanted when she was a child. The school became a beacon of hope for the village, a place where every child could learn and dare to dream better. Auntie Nkechi, who had once mistreated Adama so harshly, couldn't help but feel ashamed of her past actions. She had lost her chance to make things right, and now she could only watch as Adama blossomed into a queen beloved by all. Ijoma too realized how wrong she had been. Seeing Adama's success and the love the villagers had for her, she knew she had wasted her time on jealousy and hatred. One day, as Adama was visiting the school she had founded, she noticed a little girl standing alone in the corner of the playground. The girl looked shy and unsure of herself, reminding Adama of her own younger self. Adama approached the girl with a warm smile and asked her name. My name is Chizoba, the girl whispered, her eyes wide with admiration as she looked up at the queen. Chizoba, that's a beautiful name. Do you like school, Chizoba? The little girl nodded, but Adama could see that something was troubling her. She knelt down to be at eye level with the child and spoke softly. Is something wrong, my dear? Chizoba hesitated for a moment before speaking. I don't have any friends, she admitted quietly. Adama's heart went out to the girl. She understood how lonely it could be to feel different or left out. You know, Chizoba, she said, when I was your age, I didn't have many friends either. But I learned that sometimes it just takes one kind person to make a difference. Would you like me to help you find a friend? The little girl's eyes lit up with hope as she nodded eagerly. Adama took her hand and together they walked around the playground, finding a group of children who were playing a game. Adama introduced Chizoba to the group, and before long, she was laughing and playing with the other children. As Adama watched Chizoba's smile grow, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She knew that this was what being a queen was all about, helping others, making a difference, and spreading kindness wherever she went. That night, after a long day of fulfilling her duties as queen, Adama returned to the palace. Prince Uzo was waiting for her in the royal garden, a peaceful spot where they often spent time together. The moonlight bathed the garden in a soft glow, and the scent of blooming flowers filled the air. How was your day, my queen? Uzo asked as he took her hand. It was wonderful, Adama replied with a contented smile. I met a little girl today who reminded me so much of myself when I was young. It made me realize how far I have come and how important it is to use our blessings to help others. Uzo smiled at his wife, his heart filled with pride. You are doing an amazing job, Adama. The people of Umunze are so lucky to have you as their queen.
and I am so lucky to have you as my wife." Adama leaned into his embrace, feeling the warmth of his love surrounded her. "And I am lucky to have you, Uzo. Together, we can make Umunze a place where everyone can thrive." As they stood there in the garden, the stars twinkling above them, Adama felt a deep sense of peace. She had found her place in the world, a place where she was loved and respected, where she could make a real difference. Her journey from the little girl who had lost everything to the Queen of Umuze was complete. She had faced many challenges, but through it all, she had remained true to herself and her values. And now, as she looked to the future, she knew that she and Uzo would continue to build a life filled with love, hope, and endless possibilities. And so, the story of Adama, the orphaned girl who became a queen, came to a beautiful and joyful end. She had faced her trials with courage and grace, and in the end, she found the happiness and love she so richly deserved. Umunze flourished under her rule, and her legacy of kindness and wisdom would be remembered for generations to come. Ogucha, the end. The story of Adama teaches us that kindness and being true to yourself are very important. Even when Adama was treated badly, she remained kind and respectful to everyone. This showed that she had a good heart. In the end, it was her kindness and intelligence that made her the queen. The story reminds us that it doesn't matter where you come from or what others think of you. What matters is how you treat others and stay true to who you are. Good things happen to those who are kind, patient, and wise. Thank you so much for watching this amazing story about Adama, the orphan girl who later became the queen of Umunze kingdom. If you liked it and felt inspired with her journey, please show your support by clicking the like button, sharing with your friends, and leaving a comment below. To see more interesting stories and learn about different cultures, subscribe to African Stories and don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Your support means a lot and helps us bring more stories to you. Until we meet again, stay connected, stay inspired, and keep smiling.